Hello and welcome to episode 429 of Retro Encounter, RPG Fans Weekly Podcast of many topics. I'm Mike Sollosi, and listeners, maybe this is your first time listening to Retro Encounter because the title of this episode is so provocative, so clickbaity, so SEO driven that I know we're going to get some new listeners here. We are going to make a tier list of Final Fantasy games, but before we explain all the rules and regulations in doing so, let's introduce the panel, starting with Aleks Franiczek.
Hello.
And Kyle Cantelon.
Hello.
And Zach Wilkerson.
Hello.
Zach, I know you're an English teacher, so I apologize that I always do not have a proper use of serial and comma and conjunction when I introduce a panel. It's just a bunch of ands, and that's wrong, and I'm sorry.
I can't imagine caring about that. It's all good.
I can't imagine people caring about the results of this podcast, but I think they will. I think they will. Aleks, this was an idea that you shot to me a few months ago, in which we would make a tier list for a specific series, and we eventually landed on Final Fantasy because it's a big popular one that makes sense for an RPG podcast, of course. But also have some specific rules around how we make the tier list, sort of turning it into a podcast game, making it sort of half a tier list, but half one of our fantasy drafts that we do on Retro Encounter every few months. So can you maybe give us not a fully abridged version or a fully fleshed out version to tell us your vision of how this episode will play out?
Yeah, so basically this was designed to try to sow as much chaos for as much entertainment as possible. And so the way I wanted to go about that was, okay, what causes the most arguments on the internet? Oh, lists.
Either ranked lists or tier lists. Those will do it.
So yeah, this is going to be a combination of the two. So we're basically going to be drafting a collective tier list in a snake order, kind of like we do with the regular draft episodes. And there are two phases. So the first will be kind of the drafting or placement phase, where we're going to go in that snake draft order, and each panelist is going to pick a game from the Final Fantasy series. So we're just focusing on like the mainline games. We're going to be doing 1 to 16, although none of us have actually played 11, so we just unilaterally decided to replace it with Tactics, because why not?
Tactics is probably the most, or close to the most, prominent Final Fantasy spin-off. It's a very loved game within the Final Fantasy oeuvre, and it only released a couple of years before 11, so it felt like a natural fit for a replacement to 11. But like you said, none of us have played 11, and I think several of us love FF Tactics, so it did feel like a natural fit. So sorry, continue.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, it is the closest to like a mainline kind of status that any Final Fantasy spin-off has. I'd say like the only game that kind of comes close in terms of like being a mainline game is Lost Odyssey, Zach's favorite game.
For a second I thought you were going to say Mystic Quest and then Faint.
I mean, remake would make sense.
So yeah, basically we're going to be placing the games on the tier list. We just have S tier, A tier, B tier, C tier, and D tier. So there's 5 tiers total, until all the games we're ranking are filled into the list. Don't think we fully decided on this actually, but I figured to add more strategy to the process. A panelist can't place a game on the same tier twice in a row. The other thing to do with the placement phase is that we all actually have one veto. So the way a veto works is that as somebody is making their pick and placing a game on the tier list, somebody can step in during the discussion and be like, actually, I feel very strongly about this being the wrong place for this game to go. And so they're allowed to throw in their veto, and they can move that game up one tier or down one tier. So you can't totally pick a new spot on the list, but you can slightly shift it based on what that panelist picks. And all of us have one veto. So after that's all through, we go to a ranking phase where we're basically going to use the list that we've came up with, and we're going to go basically through a democratic process, one tier at a time, deciding what the order of that tier is going to be. So basically we are ranking the games in a fully linear order. but also within their respective tiers. And then no games can actually move tiers at that point. Like every game is already fixed in its tier. We're just deciding the order, and we're just going to do that in the discussion.
I don't mind telegraphing this thought ahead of time. At least me personally, I think the tiers themselves are more powerful divisions than order within a tiers. So I probably will not care that strongly about order within tier. I have very clearly defined opinions on most of the Final Fantasy series and where I would tier each of them. Yeah, I don't expect a lot of fuss from me at that final phase of the list.
Yeah, I didn't imagine this part of it to be too complicated. Basically, it'll just have like a bit more discussion, and then we just settle on an order, and then that'll be it.
All right, so I think that settles it. We're pretty clear on the rules. Maybe we need to have a discussion or a clarification sometime mid-process if one of us isn't certain, but we can cross that bridge when we come to it. Each of us will have 4 picks because there are 16 games in the list that we've decided. Final Fantasies 1 through 16 minus 11 plus tactics. And we use a random number generator to determine the draft order ahead of time. So Kyle has the first pick. I have the second, Zach has the third, and unlucky Alex has the fourth. But because we're in snake draft order, after those first 4 picks, the second round is the reverse of that order. And then we go through that cycle of Kyle, me, Zach, Alex, Zach, me, Kyle, twice. And I think we're ready to begin. So shall we begin?
Yeah, let's cause some chaos.
Let's do it.
Oh, but is Kyle gonna ask to kill chaos on his first?
Oh man, I was honestly.
Is Stranger of Paradise on our list?
Oh man, should we just replace? I don't know.
That game is so fun.
Maybe we should make this go over to 20 and put in remake and Stranger of Paradise and Mystic Quest. All right. Oh no. Okay, we're not doing that.
All evidence of my personal growth is that I did not jump in and interrupt Alex when he was talking about causing chaos, and I just so badly want to be like, kill chaos.
Ooh, so should we put in Dissidia instead of 13? Okay, no. Backing away from that ledge. But we are going to hold hands and then step into the abyss together with this spicy episode of Retro Encounter, beginning with pick number 1. Kyle, what game and what tier gets the first overall pick?
All right, with the first pick in this Final Fantasy tier list chaos generator, we are going to place Final Fantasy Tactics in tier S.
It's not controversial.
I played it conservative on purpose. I didn't think it was going to be super controversial. Like to start everyone off with, a little bit of a softball. Tactics, of course, is like we sort of briefly mentioned, is the tactical role-playing game, like it says, grid-based, featuring some really powerful characters, including the sort of Ramza and Delita connection. Takes place in the kingdom of Ivalice. It's inspired by sort of the Middle Ages. Lot of popularity for its hyper breakable and amazing class system, and just really awesome turn-based style. The story is like, it's good, but Delita itself, his relationship with Ramza really steals the show. It's often pointed to as one of the kind of more nuanced relationships between characters, and sort of the concept of the anti-hero, especially in Final Fantasy lore. So sort of just like an easy S tier pick for me. Yeah, that's how we want to start.
All right, well, I'm not vetoing that. First of all, I've probably said so on podcasts 20 times. Final Fantasy Tactics is one of my favorite games ever. It's probably in my personal top 10 RPGs. I'm not gonna try and say the other 9 or anything. I love how Final Fantasy Tactics has a combat system that's like surprisingly deep and never really gets boring. It has a storyline that I think succeeds, from its political nature to its personal nature to its sort of world threatening stakes kind of nature. And I've maybe surprisingly, I've only beaten the game I think twice ever, but both of those playthroughs were in the low hundreds of hours because I just have so much fun in the playground of FF Tactics that I completely dove in head first both times. So yeah, Final Fantasy Tactics, no argument here. When's that remake coming, Square Enix?
There's the rumors, man. There's rumors abound.
Plenty of rumors.
Some reliable sources say it's coming, but I am also not a veto here. I think this is one of the easier S tier picks, at least for Retro Encounter. It's got everything going for it. It's my favorite tactical RPG. It's one of my favorite stories in RPGs. I think that it is. I think it's the pinnacle of single player Final Fantasy. Personally, I don't think there's a better one, and I think that it absolutely belongs in S tier.
Yeah, it's funny how out of all of these games we're drafting, there's all these like mainline Final Fantasy games. Tactics is not one of them, but it's the one that I was like least concerned about. I also like think it's totally deserving of S tier. Also, one of my favorite stories in games. I remember first time I played it, I was in high school, and I was like really into English and really into Shakespeare at the time. And I'm like, man, Tactics is like Shakespeare quality stuff. And although that's not like maybe quite so true in terms of like the actual writing, I played the PS1 version to start. Like the story really is of like Shakespearean weight, and like the characterizations and their arcs, and yeah, like you said, Kyle, that dynamic between Ramza and Delita is like one of the greatest like foil characterizations I've ever seen in a video game. It's like fascinating the way it starts and develops, and then the fact that the combat and the job system are just so much fun to toy around it is just icing on top of the cake. Like this game rules, and the PSP version adding those like amazing like hand drawn type cutscenes is just took it to another level as well.
I wonder if someone's written a master's thesis comparing Ramza and Delita to Rio and Joey from Suikoden 2.
Dude, get out of my head.
Because that feels like a at least many think pieces in the making.
There's an idea on our features board for that very issue when the remakes come out.
I did not know that, but I'm not surprised to hear it. Yeah, I love Final Fantasy Tactics. There was no danger of me interfering with this pick. But are we ready to move on? Because I have a feeling my pick is going to upset some people.
I feel like I did a poor job, sort of like I just I guess wasn't really ready maybe to introduce Tactics as well as I could have, but yeah, I'm good to move on.
You're great.
Because I would have considered putting it at Tactics in S tier at a later pick, but the thing is, I wanted to when I was trying to draw a draft board and formulate strategy for this, I wanted to say what would make me more upset: a game I dislike to be ranked A or S, or a game I love to be ranked C or D. And I wasn't sure which one would make me feel worse, but I knew which one which one was maybe the most at risk of happening. So I have two Final Fantasy games that I sort of think of as my least favorite. I have not played Final Fantasy 15, so that one I cannot consider for this draft at all. But I'm going to put one of my least favorite games in the D tier, and I'm pretty sure people are going to veto it immediately and move it to the C tier. Going in D tier is Final Fantasy VIII. Goodbye. I know, it's fine.
Whoa. What a curveball.
I have been kind of discussing with you over the past few weeks about, oh man, I hate this game, I love that game, and telling them which ones I was gonna move around. I didn't mention FF8 because I genuinely dislike this game. I don't like that there's no customizable equipment, how everything is attached to a draw cast system that punishes that rewards min-maxing but makes it very tedious and lowers your stats when you cast spells. It encourages a form of and also limit breaks and character unique moves are attached to critically low health. There's hardly any equipment customization other than each character getting, I think, 4 or 5 weapon upgrades. I don't mind that so much is attached to the summons, the GF system, but it parts of the Final Fantasy VIII ethos just I just find annoying, But perhaps worse, I think that the Squall Renoa relationship is toxic and horrible. Like he treats everyone around him poorly. People are drawn to him regardless. Squall has no charisma whatsoever. He's probably my least favorite
He's
Final
the
Fantasy
best
main
looking
character.
guy in the room. Get
I
it
know,
right.
yeah.
Right?
Well, how about some showing and not telling? Because I can't believe that. Like if you tell me that Clive is the best looking guy in the room, I am nodding my head and injuring my neck. But I'm not doing that with Squall Leonhardt.
That's Ben Starr's fault. I'll be honest.
But Ben Starr is a contributing factor. But no, I really and parts of the Final Fantasy VIII story I don't mind. Like, I know people clown on time compression sometimes, but the vision of the future informing the setup of the events of the game doesn't. I don't mind that, but I mean, just the natures of what the Majo / sorceresses are. Some of the extreme triteness of the plots and of the plot and the coincidences therein. Like I just mostly I can't buy what Final Fantasy VIII is selling. The gameplay systems annoy me a lot, and I hate the Squall Renoa relationship. It's in D tier unless someone vetoes it up to C.
Look, Final Fantasy VIII is a silly game, but it's also a beautiful game. It was gonna be my first pick. I was gonna draft that thing in A tier. I really like this game. I like all of its kind of unique ideas, such as like the student salary being like the way you get money. I do not mind the draw system, and playing the remastered version with fast forwarding makes it a lot more convenient to kind of deal with. You don't have to min max, even if like the game sort of rewards it. Like you can get by the game fine without like grinding to get all your stats up to as much as possible. I think the story's really like silly but also interesting, and so many parts of it are just like burned into my brain. It might have just been the time in my life that I played it, but like it felt like proto Kingdom Hearts, and like, and that can easily be
You're preaching to the choir
are,
now.
Are you aware of my feelings on Kingdom Hearts?
I am, Sollosi, so I totally understand why you threw it in D tier. But like this game, like some of like its greatest story segments, like going into space with like Squall and Renoa, all like the Laguna flashbacks, like they're just like,
I would have preferred if the game was about the Laguna flashbacks.
I mean, like they're just a nice flavor on top of the rest of the experience. It just like it's fascinating, the presentation of this game to me. It's like something that I didn't love the first time I played it, but that like I haven't really been able to get it quite out of my head since. And the Squall and Renoa relationship, like they're teenagers. Like Squall's like a stupid idiot and gets away with it because he's like 17 years old. And I think like the way that they affect each other and the way they develop as characters like actually feels like natural, considering that they are teenagers. But with all that said, I am going to veto this pick. I'm going to move that thing into C tier.
Truthfully, I think it probably belongs in C tier, but I knew it was going to get vetoed up no matter what. So I picked D, anticipating it going to C, and I'm fine with this. It is my least favorite Final Fantasy, at least numbered 4 through 10. And I just like I did play it to completion many years ago, only the one time. Maybe I played it at the wrong time in my life. I was in my late teens when I played it, but I don't know, just parts of it. This was not the Final Fantasy I loved. Like many of my favorite parts of the gameplay of 4 through 7 were not represented in 8, and I just found the Squall and Renoa relationship awful. And seeing many people in Final Fantasy and RPG communities over the years praise the relationship made me genuinely confused and upset. so that has influenced my opinion negatively over time, because again, I played this game more than 20 years ago, but I maybe I need to replay it and give it a second chance, but now is not that time. Today is the time where it goes into D/C tier.
Yeah, I mean, it's a game I don't remember very well, but I remember not liking it at all when it came out. And so like I wasn't going to video this because I just don't care about Final Fantasy VIII. I remember just thinking that it felt odd. And usually like in my 30s now, like I like games that are odd, but with the way you guys are describing it, I'm like, I don't need to revisit this game. So I think that from a general perspective, I think a C tier ranking is probably appropriate. From like I hate to talk about like the community, but like I feel like that's one that people can't be too upset about unless you're a Final Fantasy VIII lover, like some of us here.
Yeah, I know that a non-trivial number of people love Final Fantasy VIII, and probably many people cite it as their favorite. And I'm not gonna like attack anyone's tastes or preferences, but my tastes and preferences are that I don't like this game, and the reason I haven't attempted to replay it is because of that negative that first negative memory of it. But mostly it comes down to I don't care for the systems, and I don't care for Squall and Renoa.
All I have to add is just I think the teenage characterizations of this game are better are easier to appreciate after you've become an adult, because revisiting the game as an adult was even further like kind of boosted my opinion of it. But
I like it more as an adult if Irvine, Quistis, and Zell had anything to do with the story after disc 1.
I mean,
That'd be cool.
Just throw them out the window. You don't need them.
Great, throw the half of the cast out the window. Sounds like an A tier Final Fantasy game. But I don't want to be too mean about it. Well, I want to be a little mean about it. But I think I mean FF8's in C tier. And now I'm a little bit less anxious for the rest of the recording. But Zach, I know a little bit about your tastes and preferences for Final Fantasy games, at least more so than because I've known you longer than I've known Kyle or Alex. So I have some guesses of what you might do for your first pick. But just go ahead and fire away.
I'm going to do something sort of controversial and say that my third pick is Final Fantasy 16 in S tier.
Oh, wow.
What?
I thought, okay, all right, Zach, okay, fascinating. My thoughts on 16 were, I know Zach likes 16. He might put it in A tier. I like 16 more than most people do.
Yeah.
Maybe if I put it in A tier, people will knock it down to B, I was anticipating maybe having to rescue 16 in like a mid round.
I mean,
but
I wrote the review for the site. I gave it a 97. I mean, like that's the highest score I've ever given in the 5 years I've been here. And I stand by it. I've played it through twice now. I watched my partner play it through once. I think Final Fantasy 16 is a masterpiece. And I think that it is sort of the end point of a certain kind of storytelling. Like it is very insular in a lot of ways, right? Like there's not a lot of choice in the narrative. There's not a lot of role playing, sort of, but the way that it does, like the big set piece moments are excellent. I mean, just so good. The combat is fun, and especially if you go to like Final Fantasy mode in the second playthrough, there's a lot of challenge there. I think the side quests get dogged on a lot by people who I think haven't played all the side quests, because the side quests in the second half of this game I think are brilliant. I think they're some of the best outside of like The Witcher 3 in the genre. I think that the Clive is one of the best protagonists. It is the best protagonist in Final Fantasy history.
He's at least my favorite of the last 20 years. At least,
I just think that it is such an encapsulation of a kind of storytelling that is not necessarily what everybody wants in terms of choice or in terms of like more Western sensibilities, but in terms of what I want and what I want in a game, which is just like excellent characterization. And there are so many good characters. There are some bad ones too. Like Jill, I think, is definitely a fumble, but there are so many good characters. There's so many good side quests. The combat is fun. The ideas, I think, are interesting and sometimes challenging to me as well. I think Final Fantasy 16 absolutely belongs in S tier. I know that I am almost alone in that, which is one of the reasons that I did it early, because outside of tactics, it is my favorite Final Fantasy single player game.
All right, I'm gonna try not to talk too long about this. If I was crafting this tier list by my own self completely, I think I would put Final Fantasy 16 in the A tier. But I am not going to use a veto to do that because I feel like maybe I would there are other scenarios where I would want to use that veto. But FF16 is a triple A, gorgeous, stunning looking video game, but even beyond its its visual choices, it just has it feels so crafted. Like when you're fighting a one of the giant bosses and the music swells as you're running up Titan's arm or something, or when
It's so good.
yeah, or when Torgal's attacked and yelps and you have to fight Solo for a second and then he comes in to make a save at a cutscene at like the 2/3 mark. This is like the second boss fight in the game or something. Like I gasped. Every I know that sometimes cinematic is a dirty word when you're talking about video games. People don't necessarily want video games to feel like movies. But when a thoughtful critic says cinematic, they mean it's like the visuals and audio and action taking place are just in perfect harmony to create a powerful emotional moment. And there are so many moments of amazing cinema in Final Fantasy 16 that it was one of my favorite games of last year. Is probably my favorite Final Fantasy game made after the PlayStation 1 era in the non FF14 division. And yeah, you know what? I'm not upset by this S ranking. Perhaps unsurprisingly, because I've said on podcasts how much I enjoy Final Fantasy 16. I think, but I mean, maybe some listeners won't enjoy this placement.
I'm just glad that Aleks doesn't have a veto.
Yeah.
Because I know he is not an S tier fan of this game.
I mean, I feel more passionately about 8 than I do about 16, so I'm glad I used the veto when I did. 16, like the praises you guys are given to it, like I agree with a lot of them. Like this game has like a lot of merits that at its best, like it was quite like a really fun game to play and like a really interesting story to experience in its best moments. The thing is, like a lot of this game is not its best moments. Like Clive is a good protagonist. Yes, he's super likable. He's almost like likable to an extent that makes me like feel cynical about his characterization. That just like he's been given all these personality traits to just make him like the most likable protagonist you
Oh
could
yeah,
get. So that doesn't gel super well with me. Like I'd prefer some more like nuanced, flawed characterization.
yeah.
The
The word Mary Sue gets thrown around a lot with him, which is a term I don't like in general. But I mean, I'm not gonna try and disagree with that notion, Alex.
and then just like the other thing is just like exploring the world in this game just made me feel like emptiness. Like there's all these like big, beautifully rendered areas, but there's basically nothing interesting to do in them. Like there's no reason to like fight mobs because like you're never really too weak in this game. Like the game is
But
like
it's
fairly
fun.
easy in terms of difficulty. It's the combat is amazing when you're in
Yeah.
kind of like the linear dungeon areas, and like the sense of momentum those dungeons have is amazing and like thrilling, and I love it. But just like the open world, like no, and like there's
it's it's a closed world space, though. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to. I actually am trying to screw with you.
no, you could justify the game. This
yeah,
is what it's all about, right?
yeah.
But like yeah, like going off the beaten path, there's no reward for like you would get in like something like the Zelda open world games or like Elden Ring or something. Like the game has nothing in terms of
It's
that.
not trying to be those games, though. That's an unfair comparison.
Well, it's not, but it has like these open zones that like the space, like it might as well be 13 in terms of its design to me.
There's still stuff to find in the zones.
A little bit. All right, all right. All right. I mean, like, I won't belabor that point too much. But then just like the other thing is like, yes, the end game. Like, I did all the side quests. Yes, the end game side quests were amazing and were some of the best side quests I have played in an RPG. To get to those side quests, I had to play some of the worst side quests I've ever played in an RPG. That just felt like MMOE in the most like time wasty sort of way. And I appreciate what those ended up giving me from the narrative experience in the long run, was it worth all that time? Would I ever spend all that time doing all those side quests again? Probably not. And then just like the party members, like Jill is in your party like for the bulk of this game, and she just like, you don't really notice her presence in combat or exploring at all, and that to me just feels like a real shame, like, because she is an interesting character. Joshua is an interesting character, and the fact that you don't feel their presence the way you did in like 15, for example. Like, if the game just learned a bit more from 15, I think it could have been like a real masterpiece. As it is,
But does Final Fantasy 15 have a wolf dog in it?
it does not. And Torgal is a very good boy. I will not debate that point. And I think this is a pretty good game. To me, it's like more of a B tier. But you can have the S tier, Zach.
Yeah, I mean, I've been mostly listening for the last 10 minutes because I'm trying to gauge sort of the room, I think. But 8 and 16 both ended up as B tier games for me when I was doing this on my own. And I found myself happy that Aleks used his veto last time, and regretting that we're so early in the process right now. Like Aleks, I don't disagree with a lot of the positives that are put forward for 16. 8 and 16 are both B tier for me because I labeled that tier like the good but flawed. And for me, 8's flaws are obvious. I have, I guess, my own like interpretation of Squall as a character. But since we're still talking 16, it was just really hard for me to feel that constant sense of progression from 16. And that was one of the main things that I ended up kind of just falling away from it, along with, the brand for the podcast is, there's always hashtag too many games out there. I remember, listening to this podcast even before I was fortunate enough to join the site. And I thought the wisest thing that we've ever really said is that constant state of progression is the thing that we really get attached to. And I just found it missing with 16, whether it was, your party members that you had really no control over, whether it was your like, you can adjust Clive's equipment and his abilities, but does it matter? Like, you can just use the same ones the whole time. You can experiment with things because it's fun and the combat's cool.
Right, but you get all those iconic abilities, and those like come at a pretty steady pace, and like some of them are really interesting to play around with as you get into the late game.
Interesting, but there's no like incentive.
I mean, is your argument the only incentive is like if it's hard enough? Is that the argument?
Yeah, I guess so, right? Like, there's, they have different star power. Like, I think that's stars, right? I go back to what we were saying earlier, Sollosi, for like their damage and their what are their ratings on those moves?
Well, I mean, I think the progression and reward is defeating more icons, getting their abilities, playing around with them, and sort of customizing Clive to play exactly how you want. You can just stick to Ifrit and Phoenix abilities for the entire game if you want, but that would be just using the first couple moves you learn at a game and ignore all the other ones. They're like, do we think it's a bad thing or a good thing that early game abilities are still usable and powerful?
I think it's both, but the fact that there's like, because there's no elemental damage, because there's no status effects, like the fact that they're, again, other than experimentation and that looks cool and I have this new power now, there just isn't. Okay, sorry. For me personally, there didn't feel as though there was a lot of incentive to mix and match. It was just new.
If that's the argument, then you can make that same argument for Final Fantasy VI. Like, that game doesn't require you to engage with its systems, but it's still fun to get new spells and new espers. And I don't think any of us would argue that 6 is going to be lower than A tier. So like, I think that it's about like how much you enjoy interacting with those systems. And I guess I did. I'm sorry. I'm a little defensive this game. I keep going. I'm sorry.
I anticipated people getting defensive on this podcast. as long as we stay respectful.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, none of this is about Zach, obviously. And we don't need to get into why Zach might feel defensive about this one. I have maybe some small reason that I think, but this is just about like, my I guess our own kind of personal interactions and what we look for in a game. And for whatever reason, I just found 16 wanting in those in some of those areas that I like to tinker with, that I like to feel like I have more in control or more, that I can, exploit the elemental system or the status effect, and that was missing for me. And I think that's just one of the reasons why I would call it, good and cinematic. I like that you described cinematic in the way that you did, Sollosi, because I think that's super appropriate for so many of the game's bigger moments. But yeah, just a game that is good but flawed for me personally.
All right, so I would like for us to move on, because otherwise this podcast will be an absolute terror to edit. But I have one last question before we move on. Kyle, is this game staying in S tier, or are you going to use your veto to knock it down to A? Because you said that you feel like this game, if it was solely up to you, would be B tier. But in the context of this, what we're doing right now in this podcast, is it staying in S tier?
Yeah, it's going to have to. We've only been through 3 games, so there's a couple more that I have other strong feelings about that I'm going to have to kind of reserve the judgment, as it were.
Fair enough.
Yay!
In that case, Final Fantasy 16 is in the S tier. I have a feeling it might not be at the very front of S tier when all is said and done. But Aleks, you now have 2 picks in a row, so please present us with the first of them.
Okay, so oh my god, what do I do? Man, this list is gonna be so wacky. I think for my first one, I'm gonna put 15 in A tier. So 15 is, I think, along with 8, the other black sheep of the series, and another one that I just like. What resonates in this game just really overcomes a lot of the flaws. I love just spending time with the boys. I think like the overall premise of this game, that you're just like on this road trip and you have a car and you can listen to Final Fantasy tunes, and there's all this banter written into the game. There's all this detail in terms of like the way the characters are animated and the way you can like feel their presence in combat in the way that you can't in 16. It's just like it adds so much to the experience. Playing to one of Final Fantasy's strengths, which has always been characterization, party characterization, and interpersonal dynamics between characters and how they grow with each other. There are obviously flaws in the combat system. It's a little wacky, but honestly, like I don't mind just playing around with it and getting through battles and moving along. Like I don't think it's as terrible as some people make it out to be. It's definitely not great though. But really, that's just like a side note to everything else. Like I love about this game. I think the dungeons are really fun to run through, especially as you're getting a lot of unique flavor text from the party members that just even further those connections deeper. The end game is feels unfinished, because it probably is unfinished. But it has like a lot of interesting ideas. I still think that chapter where Ignis is blinded and you have to go through a dungeon, considering that, is one of the most unique and interesting things I've ever seen attempted in an RPG. That I really appreciate. I don't think I've ever like felt that kind of sympathy for an NPC before, and I think that is a phenomenal achievement that this game managed to accomplish. And then just the end game, especially if you're playing like the Royal Edition that expanded the final dungeon, where all the characters are older, and playing into like the whole ending of the game, which we don't have to get too much into, but I think is absolutely beautifully done. This game just like hits such a high emotional note for me, and is an experience I don't think I'll ever forget. Flaws be damned. So for that reason, I'm throwing it in A tier.
You know, I'm not sure that I would have put it in A tier. Maybe actually, I actually really like Final Fantasy 15 a lot, and I think that the piece that you submitted, that's published on the site about the narrative of it, is apropos of one of the reasons why it's so good. But like, it's such a weird game, right? Like its
Yeah.
first 8 chapters are so dissociated from its last 6 chapters. But I think the strength of those first 8 chapters and the fun of exploring that world, and the characterization and everything you said about it, are really important. And, on a personal note, like I hadn't really played an RPG like in earnest, a new one in years when 15 came out, but I was like, I'm going to play this. And I did, and I loved it. And it's one of the reasons I'm here. So like, I think that's something like it's got a lot of stuff that it throws against the wall, and I don't think it all sticks. But I
No.
do think that it is a fun experience, and I think that the party dynamics are great. The DLC is fun, like especially Episode Ignis, I think is excellent. The Shimamura soundtrack is phenomenal.
Oh yeah.
Um, I think it belongs in A tier. Honestly, like no veto for me. I think it's a good pick.
I am going to recuse myself from this conversation because I have not played Final Fantasy 15. I was a little bit leery about some of the choices and changes it made from its, from the early impressions of it, even though a lot of people that I know and respect really liked it. Others were colder on it. So, but mostly it's just timing and podcasts have gotten in the way. So I haven't gotten around to FF15 yet. I was hoping to maybe try to at least play the beginning of it before we recorded, but yeah, you can blame Dark Souls and Dragon Age for that not happening. Uh, I'm not going to use a veto. I don't have a workable opinion on this game, so yeah, it stays in A tier unless Kyle decides to use his veto.
No veto for me. This one is in my good but flawed tier. I think Aleks did a really good job of kind of summing it all up. I think maybe the only thing, and maybe I just wasn't paying attention, but the 15 has one of the more unique villains in Final Fantasy. He's not, or he, it, whatever, is not, just the way in which the villain is presented throughout the story, I think is unique to 15 in a lot of ways, and is at least worth mentioning, and is interesting overall.
Yeah, because it's like at first, like it's pretty ambiguous whether he actually is the villain or not. Like he's
Right.
kind of just accompanies the party a little bit. You even like have him kind of in the party, or at least you're driving around with him for a little bit. I think like that's a pretty interesting bit of characterization too. And then yeah, ultimately, like I won't get too into the nitty gritty, but his relation to Noctis, and like with Noctis being like the royal heir and Arden being something different, is just like another like kind of Delta Ramza is just like a really interesting like foil dynamic between the two characters that I think is excellently developed.
All right, so I think we've closed the door on Final Fantasy 15. A slight surprise to me that it lands in A tier, but maybe this will be a positively toned episode for the most part when we're not talking about Final Fantasy 8. But Aleks, you have another pick right now, the first pick of round 2, and you have 12 of our games before you to choose.
Yeah, so my first pick was one of love, and the second pick will be one of, I guess, not hate by any means, but just ambivalence, where a lot of people see masterpiece. And that's going to be Final Fantasy 9 in B tier.
Ooh.
Oof.
9 is
Huh.
a visually gorgeous game. It's like one of the best looking PS1 games. The soundtrack is really nice, and like the songs always accompany what's going on very nicely. So Final Fantasy is a series that to me is defined by not really falling into easy definitions, always kind of pushing the envelope with what it's trying to do narratively. And Final Fantasy IX, rather than being one of those things, feels more like a culmination of everything that came before. So it's very whimsical fantasy, like the earlier games. It has some of the melodrama more present in games like 7 and 8. It tries to get into some more philosophical themes, and I think does that to varying levels of good. But ultimately, like I don't really enjoy playing this game that much. In terms of like I guess I haven't played like a remaster where I was able to like speed things up. I remember the combat feeling super slow. I remember the character customization system just not feeling super interesting or fun to play with. Like skills are tied to the different items you equip, and you have to like keep them equipped in order to like get skills, but those skills are still locked to specific characters. So
Yeah, it's there's a lot of character heterogeneity,
yeah,
but it is a non-trivial grind if you want to permanently unlock skill selection. It's that's one of the weaknesses of the game for sure.
yeah, which I guess like yeah,
Mhm.
I got pretty hung up on when I played it before. But it's also similar. Like you brought up a fair criticism with 8 that outside of Squall, Renoa, and to a lesser extent Zell, the rest of the cast is pretty disposable. I feel similarly with this game. Like Zidane, Vivi, Steiner, uh, Dagger are great characters and have interesting dynamics with each other. But outside of that, I don't care at all about those other characters.
Well, okay. I'm going to interrupt you a little bit. The thing is, the characters in Final Fantasy IX are very unique, and they in a way I think they each represent a like not a perversion or a subversion, but like they are emblematic of a certain Final Fantasy class or trope,
Yes.
but given a Final Fantasy IX twist of their own way. And I mostly appreciate that, but they have some odd choices here because Freya is not a story factor after her quite moving actually story sequence in the first disc.
It is a great segment. Yeah.
Amaranth joins so late that I feel like he is a total afterthought. It's unfortunate that Aiko joins late and has many of the same skills that Dagger has. Like there's character choices and balance and design choices that I think keep Final Fantasy IX away from S tier for me personally, but I really like a lot of what it does. I mean, having characters that feel unique and distinct from each other is important to me, and that's one thing I like about 9 a lot. The the story I think sort of leans more into fairy tale whimsy than most of the previous Final Fantasies did. In a way that I don't think crosses any lines. I really like some of the late game character scenarios, like Zidane becomes way more interesting towards the end of the game. Uh, I love everything about Vivi's character journey, especially when he has to confront a certain part of his character. I think in disc 3, but I'd have to. It's been a while since I played Final Fantasy IX. To me, this is a game in A tier. Putting it in B tier does not offend me. It's not what I would have done. But I don't think I'm gonna use a veto because I think I'll only really use a veto if I think maybe a game is 2 tiers off. Don't hold me to that, but that's my feeling right now. So I'm a little bit regretful about keeping FF9 in B tier if that's what happens. But yeah, does someone else feel like using their veto now?
I don't. Only because my one playthrough of the game when it first came out basically agrees with Aleks. And my wife is going to murder me when this podcast is over. But
Alana was on the Final Fantasy ranking episode that we did, I think 5 or 6 years ago, where Final Fantasy IX was ranking number 1 overall.
That is correct, and she's a fan. And it's a game that I've always felt like I need to go back to, because my expectations for 9 were like sky high, because I've been a Final Fantasy fan since 1989, and so I was like, oh, it's like going back to the OGs, and I was like, I played it and I was like, and that's my general feeling on it in retrospect, even though it was 25 years ago and I don't remember it, was and so Aleks pressed on a lot of the buttons that I remember thinking at the time, and I think B tier is an appropriate ranking for it.
I actually kind of wanted to put it in C tier, but I didn't want to be mean. But that's just a side note.
I think B is appropriate.
Yeah.
It's too late to change now. But if you had put it in C tier, I would have probably used a veto to move it to B.
I didn't want to just like draw out people's vetoes. So
in B right now. Oh, I was totally intending to draw out people's vetoes when I put FF8 in D tier.
Oh, I know.
I appreciate that.
But Kyle, you're the last word on here. Give us some of your feelings about Final Fantasy IX, and then also whether you're going to use your veto or not.
This is the third game in a row where I have that rule that I thought about for myself, Sollosi, where if it's 2 tiers away kind of thing. This is the third one in a row that would match that for me. Final Fantasy IX is a tricky one for me to talk about because, like a lot of things, it can get attached to periods in our life. And Final Fantasy IX is an S tier game for me because there's so much nostalgia, and it's like the first ever Final Fantasy game that I sort of was old enough to purchase on my own. I played it through on my own. I struggled through so many parts of it on my own. I found the solutions online on my own when I discovered what a guide was. So there's just like it's hard for me to talk about Final Fantasy IX in a way that is even bordering on academic, because it all just becomes subjective fanboying. Zidane's character arc is one of the more fascinating protagonist ones for me, even though it's kind of like one of the flatter ones, if that makes any sense. Like he starts off with like this mischievous butt pinching personality, and becomes extremely self-loathing, and then has this kind of heroic like return at the end that has always really stuck with me. His end scene there, if you get kind of like, wait out the best ending type thing, is just really, really rewarding, I guess, from my perspective. Vivi, of course, is a fan favorite, even though he's literally just a black mage, which is like so interesting. The concept of a princess being named Dagger is great. I struggle with whether to use my veto or not, and maybe you can hear it in my voice. I do want to acknowledge, though, that it's far from a perfect game. I definitely agree with the idea that like Quina, the blue mage, I actually don't even know how to pronounce their name, and Amaranth, they're just really kind of throwaway characters that are representative of kind of some of the tropes or the job classes that we see in something like 14 or in something like 5 originally. So I do think that I think perhaps if I could just take issue with just maybe one thing that Aleks said. It's not personal to Aleks, just the criticism of that. It's pretty, I guess from my standpoint on the opposite side, it's pretty impressive that it takes all of those things that we thought of as Final Fantasy and sort of puts them together in this really well done kind of traditional sense. And the fact that they swung so hard with 7 and 8 in so many directions, and then just kind of plopped this nice traditional 9 in before another sort of titanic swing with 10 in a lot of ways. I just kind of feel like 9's underappreciated. I think it minimum belongs in A tier. I don't have the heart to use a veto on it yet. But yeah, I mean, B tier is not disrespectful, I don't think. So that's positive. But I do think fondly of 9. I do see 9 fondly, and I can understand why Alana may be yelling in the background while Zach's microphone is muted.
I'm not even going to tell her until the episode comes out.
Oh, so you're saying I should text her tomorrow about it?
Yeah, do your thing, man.
Maybe I should just use the veto now and I'll be a hero.
To her, you would be.
Yeah, hey, Matt, that's all that matters.
I'm thinking about a veto, but I'm just thinking, I'm catastrophizing a little bit, thinking about scenarios that would make me more upset.
Yeah, that's the thing, right?
So I'm gonna leave it alone, but with some regrets. I truly think Final Fantasy IX belongs in A, but alas.
I think just as a random aside, I think that's how this process is working. Where like where we're just 3 times in a row, I'm just like, God, this sucks. I hate this.
But I would like to move on a little bit because we are almost an hour into recording, and we're less than a third of the way through the draft phase. So we need to pick it up a little bit. So Zach, you cannot put something in S tier now. So there's one game I'm pretty sure you're not picking, right?
That's true.
So what is going to be your pick of the second round?
I'm gonna put a game that I think belongs firmly in A tier, as sort of the beginning of what real Final Fantasy is, and that is Final Fantasy IV. Um, so Final Fantasy IV, to me, like when I think of Final Fantasy, I think of Final Fantasy IV. Like
Mm.
I feel like it starts so much of what the series is known for, what the series is good at, what the series is interesting for. And sure, like the story in retrospect is absurd. It's so anime. I don't care how much I love Kane. That whole arc is absurd. Um, and there are so many things about it that are kind of insane, but like that's part of what I love about it. Like every time I come back to Final Fantasy IV, like I play through it and I play through it fast. Like it's like 2 sit down playthroughs because it's so well paced. It's got these like big larger than life characters, these big larger than life moments that sit in my memory all the time, including the music. I know that when we're talking about the Super Nintendo, everybody talks about 6, but I want to talk about 4 and how good the music is in 4. It's fantastic. Like it's not a perfect game, and it's not even like uh, uh, in modern standards it would be like bad, but like it's such a good game for its time. It's such an important game for its time, and I think Final Fantasy 4 belongs firmly in the A tier.
I think I ultimately agree with you. My feeling is if I examine Final Fantasy IV on its merits and completely divorce myself of nostalgia, maybe it's a B tier Final Fantasy. But if I go entirely by feelings and include nostalgia, maybe it's an S tier because it was my first RPG, and I very fondly remember when I first played it and was in probably a different stage of my life every time I replayed it because it's been remade so many times and I've played most of those remakes. Um, I think A tier is ultimately a very fair place for it. Although if I know there's FF4 haters out there. I'm not sure if we have any present. I would not
Who
be.
could hate this game?
Yeah, for real.
I don't know. Like I would not. I wouldn't lose sleep over someone knocking it down to B, but I'm not going to be that person. FF4 belongs in A to me.
Yeah, I think what both of you said makes a lot of sense. Like trying to detach like both personal context and historical importance, which is something I usually value quite a bit. Um, out completely divorce that from 4 and A tier makes sense. I think historical importance and just like what it did for defining what a Japanese RPG could be and what its strengths are and what it can do with kind of like merging like storytelling with like character classes and its systems and things like that, and the way like a character might like learn a move at like a particular narrative moment. I think all that stuff is beautiful and done exceptionally well in this game. Even going back to it, I mean, like the three of us just played it earlier this year, and I still really appreciated all that stuff. That would push it into S tier for me, but I'm not mad at A tier. I think it makes sense.
Kyle, do you have any thoughts?
What do we think the biggest difference between 9 and 4 is?
4 is more fun to play.
Yeah, facts.
I put 9 and 4 both in A, and I think that they're similar games in that they have distinct characters and classes and look and sound gorgeous for their time specifically. So I would probably put them very on a similar plane personally, but I'm not going to I'm not going to move Vito from here.
I mean, I think that a big part of it is that like Final Fantasy IV did it first and did it way earlier. And it did it in a way that is more well paced. And
Amazingly
also it's a
paced.
1991 game. It's insane.
So Kyle, am I interpreting this right that you were contemplating a veto here?
No, not
Oh,
necessarily. I'm sorry.
okay.
That's a good read. I was actually mostly just thinking. I think those are valid points. I don't even know if I actually have my own opinion. I just thought of the question as we were, as those games ended up being back to back. Do you think the pacing makes four's characters feel less irrelevant as the game goes on?
I think a great thing that 4 does is it embeds specific characters into specific parts of the game, and it also balances the gameplay around that party composition. I think it's like, in terms of like balance, I don't think balance is actually something the FF series has really excelled at throughout its history at all. And I think 4 might, aside from maybe 5, be like the best balanced game in the series. Like, it just feels like, in terms of like the difficulty is tuned right, the specific like gimmicks to like the boss fights as you approach them with a specific party feel like really rewarding to overcome. And that, compared like together with like the pacing and how quickly characters develop through like the segments that they're in the party, is just really well done to this day.
Cool.
All right, so if we're in mostly thoughtful agreement about Final Fantasy IV and A tier, I suppose it's my turn now. And I'm not sure what to do now. Like, do I go for a favorite pick and give something I like a high ranking, or do I do a more spiteful pick and something I don't like as much a low ranking? Because I mean, the stuff that I think like the back end of this draft is going to be the games that we're a little bit more indifferent about, generally speaking. So you know, I'm going to try and reward a game I really, really like. And it's a game I even replayed earlier this year. I'm going to place Final Fantasy V into the A tier.
Sick. Love it.
You know what? Maybe I should have been. Maybe I should have put it into S, so someone would be pressured into knocking it down.
Too late, Sollosi.
But it's too late for that. I agree. So
yeah, that would have gotten me.
It is in the A tier right now, but will it stay there? I mean, the first thing out of the way is Final Fantasy V has an extremely fun interpretation of the Final Fantasy class system. It expands everything that was done in Final Fantasy III with removing some things like class change penalties, basically a lot of the gameplay and character progress is unlocking more classes as you move forward with the story. And in the second half of the story, where you have nearly every class unlocked, giving you major equipment and item rewards to push those classes into sort of new heights of power. It's so much. It's such a fun level of explore, reward, and customize that I experienced in Fast Forward earlier this year when I played Final Fantasy V on the Pixel Remaster version, which let me manipulate the encounter rate and experience rate and other things. I just think the class system is so fun to play around with. The characters themselves are really entertaining. I feel like Ferris is probably a personal favorite, but and the way that the puzzle pieces fit together towards the end, it reminds me of a good Dragon Quest game, because Final Fantasy V is in 3 distinct acts, and the third act, the map of the third act is informed by the interlocking maps of acts 1 and 2. And when you see things like, oh, this building that was sealed away in act 2 now has a bridge to it, and several interactions like that, when they all come together in act 3, it's so fun and exciting that I felt myself like wondering if I liked Final Fantasy V more than Final Fantasy IV when I replayed that earlier this year. Ultimately, I won't say that is true of me, but I think Final Fantasy V is really, really great and belongs in A tier.
This is a tough one for me because, again, I only played Final Fantasy V when it came out for the PlayStation, and I did not like it.
It's the worst version of it.
Right. And I but I don't think that's the reason why. I think the reason why is that when it came out, like, my expectations for story were very different from what I got.
Mm-hmm.
And my expectations for story were very different from any Final Fantasy game, because we got the last 3 I'd played were 4, 6, and 7. And so I was like, oh man, this is going to be something from a story perspective. And it absolutely wasn't. And I think the story is bad in Final Fantasy V. But I will say that my tastes and preferences have changed a lot since then. And it's always been a game that I've considered going back to be like, yeah, all right, I love job systems now. I am more of a systems guy now than I am a story guy, because JRPG stories are usually bad. And so we're going to continue talking. I'm considering a veto here, but I don't feel like I remember it well enough to be informed enough to veto it, because it is absolutely like C at best in my mind. But it's also a game that I played so long ago, and so many people I respect, including you, like it a lot. So I'll stay silent for now.
Yeah, I'm actually on the opposite end of that spectrum. Like, I experienced it first last year as a remaster, so I was kind of right away struck by how influential it was. Like, I could see so much of the class system DNA from tactics to to any other tactical game almost in 5, and just like the granted with the sliders turned up, as Sollosi noted, the ability to just experiment endlessly with those jobs and the combinations. Maybe this is a hot take. I kind of thought Bartz was like just a fine character. Like, I don't know why he's not talked about as a more interesting protagonist. Like, he's fine.
He's a little bit blank slate, but he gets enough moments that I think make him better than a true like create a wrestler for version of a character. But I mean I'm not gonna say he's as interesting or as nuanced as like Cecil or Terra or Celeste. But
No, that's fair.
I don't want to hate on Bartz or correct you or anything.
Perhaps he's kind of victim of his own circumstance, being caught in between those two. But I mean, like the whole the old wizard and his granddaughter, their arc is interesting. Even if the story as a whole can leave something to be desired. I just think that there was talk about how 4 did it better and did it earlier, and for 5 to have the job system it did even then, and for so much of what I came to know in job and class systems, to see such obvious connections back to that, to me, it like kind of automatically made it an A tier just for me personally.
Yeah, like this game isn't one that I would personally put very high, but it's also one that I'm not really interested in hating on at all, because hey, if you're looking for like a good RPG system and a well-balanced RPG for the time, like 5 has got you covered. Like it really is fun to experiment with character customization if you do want to spend a lot of time doing that. And I'm sure that if I played it in the Pixel Remaster version, I would probably appreciate the streamlining of that process, that I could fine tune it to how much time I want to spend grinding out character classes and things like that. Because when I played it when I was younger, I did not get into that at all. I thought it was such a grind, trying to like get the exact builds I wanted to do, and I had time to grind that back then, so it wasn't that big of a deal. But it did make me hesitate to go back to the game. It also made the game not have a super strong impression for me. But you did say something I appreciate, Sollosi, that the game almost like reminded you of a Dragon Quest game, and I think that's a really good comparison. It does feel like more of a Dragon Quest game in terms of like it's comedic and sillier sort of elements and writing and things like that, that I might appreciate more now, but it's just not what I'm looking for in a Final Fantasy game. And like you were explaining, Zach, I think that really like put a damper in my early impression of it, and that I still hold to this day.
I mean, geez, I maybe played Final Fantasy VIII around the same time you guys played Final Fantasy V, and maybe we're holding on to those old old stead opinions that border on grudges.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
That's why I'm not going to veto, because like I am like, I'm pretty sure I would actually like it a lot if I played it today. So like, no veto from me.
I still have my veto, and I'm obviously not going to veto my own answer. Although it would be amusing if I did veto my own answer.
That'd be amazing.
To move it up to S tier. No, I don't want to do that. But I'm just trying to. I think the number of scenarios where I would want to use my veto are lowering. But I'm ready to move on to Kyle's next pick, unless someone wants to speak now or forever hold your peace. Otherwise, Final Fantasy V is an A tier. A is a popular tier right now. It's almost half of our picks.
Yeah, we got to switch it up a little bit.
Well, I mean, 3 of us aren't allowed to use A tier in the next round. or no, the two of us, Zach and I. But Kyle, you can place any remaining game in any tier other than S right now. So go ahead and give us the final pick of round 2 before giving us the first pick of round 3.
I I kind of want to channel I want to go full Sollosi here and see how much we can. But I don't.
Go for it.
Oh,
Words of Emperor
Zach,
Palpatine,
if he puts 14 in C tier, we can both use our vetoes to move it up 2 tiers.
Okay, we'll save that part. We're gonna. Oh, jeez. Well, good thing I played it safe on the first one. We're gonna put Final Fantasy VI in B tier.
Whoa!
Oh my god.
Veto.
Okay. All right. Processing this a little bit. Kyle places Final Fantasy VI in B tier. Zach immediately uses his veto to, I presume, move it to A and not C.
To move it to S if I could.
Sollosi, please use your veto to get the thing up to S.
Is FF6 as good as FF16?
I mean, I don't think so, but it's an S tier Final Fantasy game. Okay, so let's let Kyle talk.
All right, yeah, let's let Kyle talk because full disclosure, in my pre-draft listing, 6 is also an S tier. So yeah, Kyle, let's tell us why you think Final Fantasy VI is a B tier game.
All right. Well, first of all, it's on brand with my fact that I think really amazing games aren't that great. Hashtag Nier Automata. But Final Fantasy VI is just something that, again, I came to first time last year, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna play this game through to completion. Everybody I respect, everybody I admire, everybody who is into the same games I am. This game is a masterpiece, and the world ends halfway through, or 2/3 of the way through, and they have kind of no main character but 2 main characters. I don't know what this game is. I think it has an identity crisis. I understand why everyone thinks it's great. I'm not pretending that I am correct. I did purposely say B tier because I figured it would get promoted to A tier, and that's sort of where I think it belongs. It has tons of positives. I do think that like the individual character arcs of Celeste, for example, is one of my favorites kind of in Final Fantasy lore, especially when we think about our female characters and how they're treated sometimes in Final Fantasy. I think that the fact that even the introduction of the game where the person you're controlling is essentially a slave is interesting. But I mean, we kind of hinted at it earlier, where like the espers and all these things that you get, they're fun to experiment with, but that sense of progression for some reason is stunted for me. I don't feel like I'm doing a great job of explaining, why, other than there's just something missing for me, and
it's hard to explain because it's an S tier game.
Well, yeah.
I think that's why.
I mean, like there's fairy tale creatures that escape from a gate and everyone freaks out. Like there's so much going on that failed to connect or land with me in a way that I was sort of expecting. And maybe that's kind of a running theme where a lot of us had like this one idea and then it was met by something else, and we struggled to bridge that gap. I know that this is a sort of a minority opinion. I'm perfectly fine with it landing in A tier. I think that's probably more representative of what we'll see, kind of throughout the hashtag internet, other than everyone who wants to yell and scream about it being S tier. Yeah, that's where I'm at.
I mean, you're describing the espers escaping as like fairies escaping is like the same way we can boil down any fantasy story to like to sounding ridiculous, right? Like, most of my friends who I know are not into video games, so like I don't I don't really talk to them about video games, but when I do, like, well, that sounds stupid. I'm like, well, like, so does like everything that you like. If you boil it down to like its most absurd plot element, and like those espers escaping, it's like a super impactful moment in the game because it's it it happens with all the Madeline stuff. It happens with all the Terra stuff, and what you know about Terra becomes so much more impactful because of that. And you know, there are so many of the things this game does so well. Like you're right, like the game is not overly challenging, and so like you don't need to experiment with espers, but you can, and it's fun. It's fun to like realize that like Sabin's magic stat is what gets to his blitz attack, so like you make his
Right.
blitzes
Yeah.
more powerful.
Yeah. All of his every blitz other than pummel and suplex are
Right.
based on magic and not strength.
Yeah, and there's just so many good little pockets of storytelling, even like optional pockets of storytelling in the second half. Like I think about all the stuff with Gao's parentage. I think about the stuff with Duncan, the stuff with Cyan, the stuff with Sabin and Edgar. Like they're like all these little vignettes. It's like almost like this collection of short stories about these characters. It's like Winesburg, Ohio, or other short story collections that are really brilliant, and it's just so well put together. The combat is just fun. So while I would put this in S tier, I'm glad that we're at least putting it in A tier, but I still respect your opinion, Kyle.
Okay, well, a couple things. First of all, my favorite short story collection with purpose is Jesus' Son by Dennis Johnson, and that's not the
Excellent
Dennis,
choice.
It's not the Dennis Johnson of the Boston Celtics and Seattle Supersonics. They even spell Dennis differently. You mentioned on how this is a game that without a main character. I sort of disagree. I think that just the main character, maybe this is overly blunt of me. I just think the main character changes because it starts out as Terra on a journey of self-discovery. She's this unique existence as a half person, half human, half esper. She's not sure what her role is. She's not sure if she can be the ray of hope that saves the world that Bannon asks her to be. But then when disaster strikes, you're not left with Terra alone. You're left with Celeste, who's on a journey of redemption. She was fighting on the evil side. Not everyone on the team trusts her. She's not sure about her feelings for Locke. But she ends up being the ray of hope that unites everyone, and also helps Terra like discover her purpose as the guardian of the children in Mobliz. So like I think that this is a game that has 14 playable characters, which seems high for a Final Fantasy game, and is super respectful about 12 of them. I mean, I'm not going to say Umaro and Gogo are richly designed characters.
Gogo is Daryl.
I think Gogo might be Gestalt. But okay, what we know Gogo for sure is the mimic from Final Fantasy V making a cameo. But like it respects all of its characters so much. I mean, Gao's scene in the World of Ruin is absolutely heartbreaking, even though he seems like a throwaway after you meet him. Like Cayenne's entire arc is awesome. I love Edgar and Sabin as your sort of like mainstay bro characters that have these that have some surprising moments that are always harmonious and not there's just a lot of brotherly love between those two brothers that I appreciate a lot. Mostly and I also love, I mean, talking about gameplay mechanics, I get annoyed if characters are too homogenous, which is a problem that I have with Final Fantasy VIII. Final Fantasy VI has characters that are super unique and usually represent a job from Final Fantasy V. Not always, but often. But then they have the magic skill sharing system that allows them to have that creates a shared skill set that balances the line between character homogeneity and character heterogeneity that I think is maybe the best that Final Fantasy has ever done. So like I love these characters. I love the balance of it. I love how the sort of the direct like the structure of the story changes pretty wildly at the big turning point. This is an S tier game for me. I am really strongly considering using my veto. I don't know. But what other scenario would make me more upset than this?
I mean, A tier is not the worst. I can think of other scenarios that would make me more upset, but like there's no way I could let 6 sit in B tier. That's absurd.
Yeah, no, I understand. If you hadn't done that, I would have. I might have waited till late into the discussion, like now, for example. But I'm not going to use my veto right now. It's going to remain in A tier.
Do you mind if I buffer just a little bit for you? I just have one more question, I guess, on this. I'm hearing and trying to call back a lot of my memories to 6, and as the person who started the controversy, like, there are a lot of things in here that should appeal to me, but I think for some reason the fact that it is still at the edge of the Super Nintendo's powers, that I think maybe that was part of why it didn't quite land as well as it could have.
I mean, maybe. I don't know. I mean, like, I think of other. It's a question for you, right? Like, is Chrono Trigger a game that you don't think belongs in S tier? Is Dragon Quest V a game that you wouldn't think belonged there? I mean,
I also wouldn't necessarily say it's at the edge of the Super Nintendo, because the N64 came out in '96 and FF6 is 1994, which is before Chrono Trigger and Seiken Densetsu 3 and Mario RPG. I think of this as a sort of middle Super Nintendo game that looks pretty fantastic for 1994. But
sprite work is excellent.
Yeah, the amount of expressions it gets out of its sprites, and just like the little, like, there's like a great YouTube video about like its animations that has recently come out, and just like how much it was able to fit like characterization into like little blinks or like little like shocks states, and like how every character had like a different way of like expressing all of those different animations that felt very, very them, was like helped like along with like what the game was trying to do by not hyper focalizing on like a single protagonist, by giving like most of the cast like their own like character growth and like special moments that also like lead to usually like growth in abilities as well.
Yeah, basically every character other than Umaru and Gogo have an Act 2 moment that I think is meaningful.
Yeah, and it's like the characters experience like the traumatic event of like the end of the world, and then in that second half of the game you're basically just going around like meeting everybody, how they've been like coping and like trying to work them through their trauma. And for a game to be doing that in 1994 and to be using like all of its graphical and like musical affordances,
Terra and Celeste's stories, so good.
So good. And yeah, it just like it really pushed the expression of what was possible on the Super Nintendo, and just elevated video game storytelling like full stop as a result. So I mean, like, I'm biased. This is probably my favorite game ever, so I mean, I'll leave it at that.
All right, I'm gonna use a Chocobo work. I'm using a veto. It's S tier now.
Thank you, Sollosi.
Excellent.
I've said many times on podcasts, and it's still true. My 2 favorite Final Fantasy games are Tactics and 6, and maybe that just, you can probably guess my age fairly accurately from that statement, but it's true, and I think I don't love this game not being S tier, so I'm using a veto, and now Kyle is the only person with a veto left. Please do not use it to knock this back to A tier.
Man, that would be serious business. No, I would not do that. That doesn't seem to bode well for my future appearances on Retro. I don't disagree with any of what you guys have said. I think it's all interesting discussion. I'm kind of happy now that I ranked it where it did, because it's allowed me to do a lot of listening and thinking on my own. Yeah, I think that's good for Final Fantasy VI. I go again, right, Sollosi?
Yes, you go again, and you are not allowed to use the B tier, but otherwise you have a lot of freedom for what you can do in this instance.
Yeah. Do we want to do, like, what is the start of round 3? Do we want to do a quick recap or anything?
Sure, if you why not? Yeah, we have 8 of our 16 games picked. So far we have Final Fantasy VI, Final Fantasy Tactics, and Final Fantasy 16 in the S tier, Final Fantasy IV, Final Fantasy V, and Final Fantasy 15 in the A tier, Final Fantasy 9 in the B tier, and Final Fantasy 8 in the C tier. So nothing is D right now, and B and C are a little lonely, but I have a feeling that B, C, D might be filled out in like the last round or so of the entire game.
I'm going to take another. Not. I'm going to go from a small, the safe pick to the controversial one. I'm going to go back to the safe zone. I'm going to put Final Fantasy VII in S tier.
If I had a veto, I would actually knock it down.
I probably have a similar feeling. I think Final Fantasy VII is so important for the moment that it was in. But if I separate myself from nostalgia, I feel like this might even be a B Final Fantasy. But I really like the characters and most of the story a lot. In my list, it's A tier, but I'm not gonna be too upset of it being S.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, I think if I was some grand mastermind, which I am so clearly not, you could pretend that the 6 move was to get you guys to use your vetoes so that I wouldn't have to worry about this one.
Well, I mean, the thing is, if I didn't use my veto, then the end result would be 6 and 7 both being A instead of 6 and 7 both being S. And I think I like that second scenario better. So I'm not terribly
Totally
bent
fair.
Bent out of shape about this.
Yeah, I mean, for me, 7 is simple. I feel about this game the way that you guys talk about 6. And honestly, like maybe it's just a little bit of an age gap, or maybe just a little bit of a weird thing that makes us all unique. But 7 is the most influential game. It's the most informal game of my life. It's the game that like started me on video games. It's the game that it was my first ever RPG, which again maybe says something about how old I am. But it was my first time encountering anything from magic to weapon customization and character, team building. It was the first time that I encountered like a cinematic sequence in a game. It was my first ever character death and trying to cope with what that was, and how that affected me and my feelings for the game for the rest of it. Sort of similar to how Zach has described his experience, I think with 4, when he says he goes back to it and he sits down and sort of Sollosi, you were saying that you play sort of each different variation of it. That's sort of how I feel with 7. I think I've beaten it in as many different ways as I have beaten any other game that I own. I've gone kind of like almost like my own personal version of a speed run. I've done a completionist run with Knights of the Round and everything. It's just something that I feel super passionate about. It was sort of the beginning of everything for me, and I won't separate nostalgia and anything else from my discussion about 7 when it comes to ranking it. So I am happy to hear that I have no possible opposition for it to be S.
No, I mean, I think that if I was going on my first playthrough, and I played it right when it came out in 1997, I would agree with you. But I played it again, not that recently, I guess, because I've been at the site for a while, when it came out for the Switch. And I think that it gets into some problems in terms of character homogenization, where all the characters feel sort of the same. And I think that
and until you get into very specific weapon selection and of course limit breaks, it gets a little too homogenous for me. But again, like if I was ranking these based on when I first played them, then FF7 might break the S tier and create a new Z tier or something.
I agree with that.
But with perspective, with perspective, it's knocked down a couple pegs for me. But I still love it. It's A tier for me.
Yeah, I think it's a really good game, but like I think that the localization hampers it so dramatically. I think the localization of this game is bad, and I think that it makes parts of the story not make sense, and parts of the story not hit as hard as they should. And I think that it has like weird pacing issues. Like after Nibelheim, I think that it kind of doesn't go anywhere for a while.
Fair.
But I there can't be any denial that like Final Fantasy VII is the most important RPG that's ever been released. And like for that alone, I think it probably, even though like I might knock it down because I don't think it's like that good anymore, it probably belongs in S tier, because as much as I love other games in this list, Final Fantasy VII is Final Fantasy VII. There isn't going to be a remake trilogy of any other game in the series because they're not Final Fantasy VII, and I think that means something. And so like I understand this pick, and I also understand the nostalgic pick, especially if you're a little bit younger, and it was your first RPG. I could see having enormous attachment to this game.
Yeah, I definitely can't hate on the pick either. Like the game does have flaws that could easily bump it down to A tier, but like what it does right, it does like really right, and like there are like translation be damned, like just some really cool set piece moments in this game that just like defined what set piece moments could be
For sure.
in any video game.
It
not
does
just
big
RPGs.
moments better than any video game.
Yeah, and I still think that opening like 8-ish hours in Midgar is just like some of the most perfectly paced RPG hours like you can find, like just like even like the ratio between like going to a new spot, being able to like explore it and get more of the city fleshed out, to like how many like battles you're doing is just like feels perfectly paced. It feels like truly cinematic.
They should mess up that pace by making a game that stretches out those 8 hours to 45 hours.
Yeah, right. Wouldn't that be a bad idea?
But I'm being a little jocular here. I enjoy Remake a lot, but yeah, continue, please.
Yeah, that would be like probably my biggest criticism about Remake. But Remake's not on this list. 7 is fine to be on S tier. I think, why not? It deserves it.
I think I understand parts of the FF7 world better after playing Remake and Rebirth, because like Zach alluded to earlier, the localization for this game is not great, and the translation is um is frequently incomplete or under explained, and sometimes just kind of bad. Yeah. And when you were playing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth for me most recently, I had moments where like, oh, is this in Final Fantasy VII? They must have made this new for the game, but no, it actually kind of was in Final Fantasy VII. And sometimes the lines are close to verbatim. It's just the translation was so rough back in 1997 that like it's making me forget parts of the game. No, FF7 is great, and its importance and impact is truly undeniable. So even though it's a personal A for me, I'm not upset by making it S. And legal and technically nobody can veto you, Kyle, except for yourself. So I don't think this is being knocked down to A. Before
yeah, like I said, I would love to pretend that I had this grand master plan, and I did not.
I mean, if that's the first pick of round 3, I guess it's my turn to continue my master plan and alternate the negative and the positive a little bit. So I'm gonna I don't know how predictable this is from me. I'm gonna make Final Fantasy X a C tier.
Whoa.
Pain.
Yeah, we're gonna veto that up to B.
All right. My plan worked exactly as I hoped. I truly think FF10 is a B tier Final Fantasy. Maybe it's at its highest points. It ascends that, but I think it's a very beautiful game that just at certain points becomes just either overrated or uninteresting to me. When I played it in the pretty soon after it came out, I was mostly just excited to play a new Final Fantasy game on my new PS2. Like with the exception of Auron, I think that each of these, like all of these characters, are undercooked majorly. Like Yuna's struggle and what a summoner is to the world of Final Fantasy X is interesting, but she also just reacts to everything with like a cheerful resignation and then over exaggerated head movements. I mean, I've seen videos online where people like have regular conversations but with head movements and body movements from Final Fantasy X, and they look like aliens doing that. They had not figured out nuance of character expression and performance when this game came out. And I'm not just talking about an awkward laugh scene. If anything, I think that's a little bit too heavily memed. But I feel like Final Fantasy X does not live up to the best in the series in terms of character or story arc, even though it's a very beautiful game that sometimes is really fun. Also, I hate so many of these mini games that are required for sigils that maybe that knocks it down from an A to a B for me. I am never going to replay this game again because I do not want to dodge lightning bolts or chase butterflies or race chocobos in this game again.
I mean, there are a lot of mini games and a lot of Final Fantasy games that I don't like. But like Final Fantasy X, like you don't need to clear those to clear the game. Like
I know.
I have never.
I was exaggerating a bit, but I also don't like. I also don't like that the best weapons in the game are hidden behind parts of the game that I hate.
That's fair. I'm just saying that like I've never dodged 200 lightning bolts, and I have certainly never beaten the chocobo races because they're freaking absurd. But 10.
The last time I played the game, I got all of the final sigils except for Tidus's, and I'm still annoyed about it.
That's pretty good, honestly.
That's really good.
Further than I've ever gotten.
I thought that the butterflies were harder than the lightning bolts, but I'm not sure how common that opinion is.
So the butterflies suck too.
Yeah.
But there are plenty of things in Rebirth where the mini games suck as well. Like I guess I don't. I think it's fair when you're putting it that way, but like I think that. Like 10 does like when we talk about cinematic RPGs, like I think that it creates the cinematic RPG. Like and in some ways, like obviously, like I think 7 does that as well. But like 10, I think perfects it. And I think that the arc of Tidus is really fascinating. I think Yuna is one of the best characters in Final Fantasy history.
I don't know if I see that.
I love Yuna. I think
agree,
Yuna is a great freaking character, and I think that the music is really good. If I could veto this, I would, even up to A, because I think that Final Fantasy X is an excellent game. But I understand all the points you made.
Yeah, it's definitely fair points. I think what really sticks out about 10 to me, and that makes it like an A tier game in my opinion, is like just how cohesively the world is presented. Because I mean, we can think back to any of the earlier Final Fantasy games that came before, and I mean, like, part of it is definitely hardware limitations, but none of those worlds felt like places the way Spira does. And just the fact that you have as a narrative device this pilgrimage that just like moves you through like these parts of the world, and you have like these characters that you meet as like recurringly as you're going through this pilgrimage, and the way like different zones lend into each other, the way that the world's history is revealed through like going through those zones, even if it's like all linear, it's like forgiven because like I feel like I'm just drinking in the world every minute that I'm playing this game.
I'm more gentle on it now than I was when I first played the game. I did not like this game when I first played it for the most part, but part of it was because it was lacking things like a non-linear world map and things that I really associated with Final Fantasy. I'm not as upset about that now as I was many years ago, but I mean. I like a world map, and this game gives you, when you get an airship in this game, it gives you a menu, and I don't know. I think that Final Fantasy X does some things extraordinarily well, and other things that I just found so annoying or frustrating or unlike my favorite at Final Fantasy games. But I think this is a B game, and I put it in C out of curiosity that Kyle might knock it up to B, and that's exactly what happened. So. Yeah, my master plan continues.
Yeah, one of my dream games is still if Square Enix for some reason decided to team up with like the NBA 2K devs to do like a Blitzball RPG sports game.
Oh my god, yes.
I think that would be absolutely unreal, because even though Blitzball is an absolutely busted mini game, it's like one of the coolest mini games that's ever been conceived at the same time.
Jack shot,
Jack shot and sphere shot, and you got to recruit 4 of the Kilika beasts because after level 50 or so, they have the highest average stats of any other team. Look, I played about 55 matches of Blitzball the last time I played FF10 in 2018. In 2015 for this podcast. So Yeah, I maybe the Final Fantasy X mini games are very present in my mind, based on my most recent playthrough. But again, I think this is a good game. I'm not as frustrated by it as I was in 2002 or whenever I first played it. But I think, I mean, in context of the whole series, for me, it's B, and so I deliberately put it in C. But now it's B, so everyone's happy. Isn't that great?
Well, except for the
Yay.
guy who doesn't like 2 hour plus podcasts, because
Yeah, the guy who's editing this podcast is not thrilled about the direction of this podcast. Let me tell you. So I mean, all of our vetoes are gone. No choices can be
Good.
it can be changed as soon as the draft picks are made. So once you say something's in a certain tier, and the pick is correct and legal, that's where it's going. And Zach, you have 6 more games to choose from, and remarkably, three of them are before 1991, and 3 of them
The
are
one I am picking
three
is not before 1991.
and 3 of them are after 2004. So let's go with your next pick.
Come on, Zach. We don't need another game in S tier. Just forget about
it's
it.
what's going to happen. I get Final Fantasy 14 absolutely is an S tier game, which is what my pick is. Final Fantasy 14 is amazing. If I had to rank all of these, it would be at the top, because and it's unfair, right? Like Final Fantasy 14 has been working with story for so many years and in so many ways.
It's had ongoing development for 14 years.
Right. Exactly. It's an unfair comparison, which is why it belongs at the top of S tier. But it is, to me, an S tier game. And it has its flaws. The normal content is sometimes too easy. Sometimes the pacing in some of the early stuff, which is what some of us have done, could use some work. But I think the storytelling hits highs that no other game in the series hits through Shadowbringers and Endwalker. The storytelling is just hitting unbelievable highs, and I won't go into any details as to why for spoilers. But it also gives you such a range and variety of ways to play the game. Like there are like I don't know how many jobs there are now, like 20 some, and you can play all of them. They're all viable. Like when people come out with like things like tier lists for jobs, it's not like in 2005 with WoW where it was like, oh, Warlock is best. It's like, no, like every job has its place, has its way, and every job has the ability to be successful even in the highest level content in this game. And so like the gameplay, especially with Dawn Trail just releasing, and how high the quality of the gameplay is in Dawn Trail, which is absurd in terms of how good it is. But the storytelling that it's done up through Endwalker being so strong, I can't imagine not putting Final Fantasy 14 in S tier. And I know that there are some things in A Realm Reborn that are not great, but like there's 250 hours otherwise to consider that are really good. Like Heaven's Ward, Shadowbringers, and Endwalker, all S tier games, and there are 3 of them in one game. And like Dawn Trail and Stormblood are both A. So like that's where I am. Like it's just there's so much happening in 14. There's so much going for 14 that I think it is an easy S tier pick.
I mean, we mentioned this already, but 14's playing with a bit of a stacked deck in that it had one abandoned development, then a second chance at life after 3 years after its initial release, and then ongoing development in the 11 years after this with I mean, one core story, and then now I guess we're into 5 expansion stories. So that is a scope and an advantage that it has over every other game on this list, which is a little unfair if you're sort of comparing apples to apples. But I mean, as an experience, I think Final Fantasy 14 is so excellent. Every major dungeon and boss encounter is unique and studied until it's perfected. Like when Aleks was describing Final Fantasy X as a place that you sort of discover and see unfolded before you in with each new zone being informative and beautiful and an experience. That's how FF14 is for me. Every time there's a new zone, I mean, I do kind of go after those little those little like wind orbs so I can fly in there as soon as possible. But the first time you go into every new area in Final Fantasy 14, like sometimes it's like Dorothy seeing Oz for the first time, because it is so beautiful and colorful, and you know that you're going to spend a lot of time there, and there's so much to discover. I've only played through, I'm gonna make up a number here, probably 60% of the Final Fantasy 14 story. But I think it's the best Final Fantasy story, at least since 2000, maybe ever. It's incredible. It has an unfair advantage for being an ongoing development MMO, but it still is an S tier. I'm no complaint from me.
So, like I said many times on this podcast, I still am at basically about to start Shadowbringers, so I haven't got to the actual like best content of this game. And so many of like the peaks of this game ring very true to me. Like, it is very well balanced. I mean, it has like the benefit of having like a team working on it all the time to make sure that's the case. And I agree so much what you said, Sollosi, but like how, especially once you get to the expansions, like how much like the world unfolds before you, and it's like in these like massive zones that are like really fun to explore too, and that have actually I don't even really need incentive to like go off the beaten path. Like, I just like when the music's playing and like the atmosphere's kicking in, like I'll just go off the beaten path just out of curiosity. But with that said, you have to play like a 100 to 150 hour like C or D tier game in order to get to the S and A tier content. And that's just like, as I am right now, which is someone who hasn't played Shadowbringers yet, that would hold this game back from S tier for me personally. But that could very easily change after I've experienced Shadowbringers and Endwalker, whether that grind was worth it. I mean, it's
Yeah.
already been worth it, but that
I mean, you
still
have
don't.
3 expansions that are all
I still
excellent in
don't
their
look
own
back on
ways.
Realm Reborn fondly at all. But yeah, I mean, like it's got the benefit of being such a massive game that takes hundreds of hours to play, and really the character development you get to witness and be part of is amazingly executed. So I ain't that mad, and I'm not gonna hate on this game at all.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to kind of piggyback on that because I generally agree with what Aleks said, just in the sense that um, I personally can't put this as an S tier game, even if I can recognize how brilliantly people think of it, because especially if you just stack it up against the Final Fantasy mainline series games, the accessibility and the, frankly, I guess, cost in both human hours and in sort of in financial dollars to be a member of this community and to get to all those experiences is significant for quite a few people, and it's just too much. And so when I think of the things that I would put in S tier, that for me just like holds it back, the accessibility issue. But perhaps that's also me applying a filter to one experience that I wouldn't apply necessarily for others, but we're doing that also in reverse and saying that it's able to have all that kind of build throughout the time, right? So just as an experience in itself, it could be S tier, but because there's just so much that goes into it, I would also keep it in that sort of high B, kind of low A tier area. But yeah, again, that's just more of like the way I came at it.
No, I think that's fair. And I think that part of what they've been trying to address is make it a more single player friendly experience. So like these are all things that have been added since you desubbed Sollosi, but like every dungeon that is mainline, you can run with what's called a trust, which I guess you saw those in Shadowbringers. And so like they've definitely tried to make it more of a single player experience, but you're right. Like in order to experience all of it, like you have to sub to the game. Even like though you can play up through Stormblood for free now, which is insane. You can play like 180 hours at least of this game for free. Like there's still an investment and there's a time investment, and I think there's something to that. And the investment that is required to get to the absolute best stuff, which, you know, two of the four of actually none of us except me have gotten to, is significant. So I think that's fair, but I also think that like we have to acknowledge that like those things, like those rewards exist if we are willing to put the time and indeed the financial investments into it.
All right, so that puts Final Fantasy XIV in S tier, which I frankly anticipated from the beginning. If someone tried to knock it below A, then Zach would have been on there with a veto. I was certain. But now we're at the end of round 3 / beginning of round 4, because Aleks, you get 2 picks in a row, and we have 3 NES Final Fantasy games, and then a couple PS2 and PS3 Final Fantasy games to choose from, with the only caveat being that you cannot start with B tier.
Right. Yeah. So I think I'm gonna leave 1 to 3 for you guys to put in D tier. In the meantime, I'll take on 12 and 13, and I'll start with 13 and putting that in C tier. And I think that's where it belongs. Because it is a pretty good game that I enjoyed my time with overall, but man, does it have some issues that hold it back and make me probably never want to replay the game again. Like the first part of the game, as everybody who knows about 13 has heard, it's basically just walking in a straight line and engaging in battles and watching really frustrating cutscenes of unlikable characters getting into a bunch of interpersonal melodrama that I just couldn't really care less about. And so that definitely held it back for me. But what kept me going and made me just really kind of play the wheels off the game despite all my frustrations with it was that it has like a genuinely amazing battle system. I think a battle system so nuanced that the designers thought players needed 50 hours basically tutorializing it, which was probably more than was needed, but it really does have tons of depth. And by the time you do get to the second part of the game, which does open up the world into something a lot more expansive and genuinely fun to engage with, you have a lot more freedom in terms of how you're going to build your party, how you're going to like balance like the different like jobs you have for different characters, how you think of synergies for those characters, and just like the feel of the combat. Doing those paradigm shifts and playing towards those synergies was genuinely a great time. So while the first part of the game is basically just, you know, a battle simulator that throws you through all these like disconnected art assets, that is a poor excuse for a world. In the end, I still pretty much enjoyed my time at the game, even though it's not one that made much of an impact on me. So I think C tier is the place for it to go.
Yeah, Aleks, you're right on the money. I played Final Fantasy 13 for the first time almost exactly 2 years ago. I think it was. I believe it was summer 2022, and we podcasted about it at the same time I played it. It was a game I avoided for years because of its reputation. I finally got around to it, and I'm like, you know what? And my feelings were like alternatingly being really fascinated by how much I liked Lightning as a character, mostly because of how no nonsense she is, and as opposed to a character that I think has a lot of nonsense, like say Yuna. But
Oh,
Shots fired.
whatever. I'm not missing with my shots. But how I was alternately frustrated by things like they have this genuinely exciting battle system, but for let's say half of the first 2/3 of the game, you only have 2 characters in your party, and you're using a gimped version of that battle system. We were talking about how Final Fantasy IV has every part of the game designed with intentionality. Like this is who's gonna be in your party for this part of the game, so we'll design the boss encounters like so. In this game, they play they do pick and choose what party members are available, but sometimes it's hindering in a major way. And even though sometimes it's a beautiful looking game, other times it's like, oh, they definitely designed these cutscenes way before the game connecting them together, because some of these are completely wild swings. I think many people would agree the best part of the game is when it opens up in a major way, when you visit sort of the second world, avoiding spoilers a little bit. And that part's fun, but it's like I wish more of the game was like that. And
Yeah.
but also, even when it is good, it's sort of it feels sort of empty. This is a game that was definitely plagued by budget and time issues, and I don't think it's the most complete version of itself. But for as beautiful and fun as it is, sometimes it has major problems, and I think C is about right.
Yeah, I don't have much more to add. I mean, um, when I first tried to play 13, I was really frustrated by how many things I was missing, like the town to dungeon feel. Um, for some reason, I was kind of just like struck by how sort of seemingly abrasive Lightning was, and it was like kind of hard to connect with her as a character for me at the beginning. I've only tried to play 13 kind of fully maybe 2 or 3 times and never quite succeeded. So I don't have a ton to offer here, just in the sense that I do agree with the sentiment, especially over the last few years, hearing the podcast talk about 13 for the Game Journal, that there's just a lot of good stuff here that wasn't well served by Square Enix. Probably, honestly, like they didn't do a good job with the game, and that's kind of well documented. But there is a lot more interesting things here than I would have originally given it on first playthrough. Like it would have been an F, like say on sort of my first playthrough. But I definitely would have settled it in here with C, even given my limited experience with it.
In my in independent tiers I sketched out before recording, this was C. So I'm perfectly happy with this.
Yep.
Zach, do you have any thoughts, or should can Aleks go for his second pick?
He can go for a second pick. I haven't played 13, so.
All right. I mean, that's basically my stance on 15 from over an hour ago. But Aleks, you have decided this episode's stances on 13 and 15. Where are you going next?
So I imagine the 13 pick wouldn't be controversial at all. This next one I think might be a little bit more controversial, but I'm also not like rage baiting at all. This is just me putting this game where I think it belongs, and that's 12 in B tier.
Boo.
Yeah, it's
Boo.
all right. It's all right.
Get him. Get him.
All right. So first of all, like 12 has like it's a very like elegantly designed game, and a lot of that is just the gambit system and what a great idea it was, and how much that influenced even games like Dragon Age Origins, having like these options for like programming your characters and making it so that you're strategizing, but you're also just letting combat flow. It's a very nice balance, and 12 has, maybe just in terms of like the feel, done it better than a lot of the games that have even tried to do it after. And okay, I'll say another good thing about the game. Like the vibe of Ivalice, as it's kind of represented in this like fully nicely realized 3D space, is very nice. Like the way he was able to adapt Matsuno's art style and world into a 3D space. Like the game still looks nice to play. It's a little pale in its aesthetic, but I think that works for kind of its more like grounded and serious themes, kind of the way that 16 tries to do as well. But ultimately, like, so with those two things in mind, I thought like my first like 20 to 30 hours of this game, like I absolutely loved, like going into like a new open zone and like seeing all the like drinking in like the music and like exploring like these wide spaces that, as somebody who never really played MMOs, I hadn't experienced before. And like I just enjoyed running around in them. I liked taking on hunts. I liked the grind. I liked the exploration. I thought that was all good, and then I was started to hit like 40 hours, 50 hours, 60 hours, and the game just stayed in that same rigid structure that just really started to grate on me a little bit. And even like with the gambit system, that wasn't enough systemically to keep me super engaged. So like the even as I was like kind of plodding along and the plot like had like its interesting moments, ultimately like by the end of this game I was a little tired of it. And so I can recognize what it does well, and I can like have these problems with it, especially like going back to it from 14. I think 14 does like that MMOE open world space like way better at this point, and like 12 just I don't think I'd want to play it again anytime soon. But this is all with the caveat that I haven't played the Zodiac edition, and I heard that's makes some nice improvements.
Perhaps a remarkable coincidence, Alex. My feelings on FF12 are almost exactly the same as yours. I had it in a preliminary B as well. I think that some things of it are really great. Like I enjoy the arc of Ash's character, and maybe less the arc but more the situation of Balthier and Bash and Fran's characters.
Mhm.
I think that when you're in the middle of side content for this game, it's fun, but things like but the documentation of it's weird. Like there isn't enough organization to things like the hunt board and fighting espers that I wish there was. But I also only played this on the PS2 and never played the Zodiac Zodiac job system version. And also, if you're not supplementing stuff with side quests all the time, then sometimes an NPC will join your party, then like instantly die in the next dungeon, and people will act as if this person had been important the whole time. They just take, for me it really felt uneven with its characters, and it's sometimes really fun as like a sort of early version of a wide open spaces RPG that was definitely influential for games like Dragon Age and Xenoblade and others. I think that those games sort of do it better. Well, not even sort of. I think those games just do it better. Yeah, I think B is about right. I also wouldn't have been upset if it had been moved to A or C, but yeah, I'm not gonna fuss about 12 in the B tier.
I think it's fair, and I'm coming at it from a very different perspective. Like, I played the Zodiac Age version of this game. That's the only version I've played. I platinumed it, which I never do. Um, and I think that the systems in this game are so interesting. Just like the ability to set gambits to very specific circumstances. Um, with your party members is extremely interesting, and especially in the high end battles. And so like I really enjoyed just sort of having to play around with that. But like I also like the story. Like I think that like while a lot of people complain about it being Star Wars-esque, like I really liked the female centric narrative. I think that Ash was a really good character, and I enjoyed it, but I also admittedly don't remember it super well. But like to me, like the systems are what made this game, and the systems are what made the game fascinating. And because like if you're engaging in the highest end content, like you are consistently thinking about what classes you have, at least in the Zodiac version, and like how they're engaging in combat. Like I think it's Final Fantasy combat at its finest in terms of pre-planning and tinkering, which is the thing I'm into. So like I would place it higher. Certainly I would probably place it S tier personally, but like I understand why others might not jive with the same way.
I mean, again, I haven't played the Zodiac Job Systems version, and I know that one of my caveats about the organization of hunts and side quests is improved in that version, but also like the job system isn't even in the old version of the game, so the license board feels, I don't know, maybe not everyone will agree with me here. The license board feels sort of like a oppressive and unnecessarily limiting at times, and then confusing at other times.
Mm-hmm.
And one last thing is the gambit system is great when it works, but at least in the original version, you unlock gambits and elements for the gambit system periodically by buying them in shops. So as I was playing the game, at least before late game, there were some gambits I wanted to set but couldn't because I hadn't bought them yet and they weren't available yet, and that was really frustrating to me. Where in a game like Dragon Age, you can set a lot of tactics at options at once. So yeah, I think that FF12 is sort of a game ahead of its time. It also had very well documented time and budget development issues. I'm sure Matsuno and others have some regrets of how FF12 turned out. And the Zodiac Job Systems version is a much more realized version of the game, but that's not what I played. And even though this is Alex's placement and not mine, I agree with B.
Yeah, I think that for my money, I'm realizing that I really am into sort of political intrigue stories. And even though this is sort of the more classic evil dictatorship type stuff, there is some nuance. Like Larsa specifically is a really interesting character. And, you know, he kind of joins as a guest a few times. And the fact that he shares love for his brother and kind of tries right up to the end to try to kind of talk him off the ledge. At least from what I remember. I haven't played the Zodiac version yet either, but it is something that was on my kind of near the top of my backlog from the next time I had a big Final Fantasy kind of itch. But even the original one, I just really enjoyed the sort of the empowering of the female characters, like Zach was saying. Balthier is just kind of like a cool ass character. Yeah, it's just a lot of neat elements to 12 that I think I personally had it at A tier, so I'm kind of in between the S and the B conversation. But the political intrigue and the just general party combinations, even with the old license board, I was really appreciative of.
You know, it's sort of amusing. I don't think any of us have mentioned Vaughn or Pinello yet.
I was just about to.
Yeah, which you know goes into I mean exactly how much I care for the two of them.
I mean, like, yeah, like you guys were saying, like Ash is a great character. Bosch is a cool character with an interesting arc. Larsa, Gabranth, what a cool dynamic between those two. And then you have your main character has Vaughn. It's just, I know this is a tired point, but like that just puts a whole damper on the way the narrative of this game is presented. It's just a totally unnecessary filter that actually like weakens the presentation of this story. So that's just holding the game back also.
I might suggest that Ash is the main character.
Yeah, I mean, like,
oh yeah,
she
no,
should be.
Yeah, that's been a forum argument for 15 plus years now.
Yeah,
probably closer to 20 by now.
But whenever you go into a town, who are you controlling? You're controlling stupid Vaughn with his chest out.
Flex on the haters.
I guess all of us have some fairly different opinions on Final Fantasy 12, but it landed on the B tier. And maybe I could have predicted this a while ago, but our last three picks are the games that probably we as a quartet have the you know the least strong feelings about, and that's the first three NES games. I have some guesses on where these three might land, but it's in the hands of Zach, myself, and Kyle in that order, and none of us can veto the decisions that we make. So, Zach, which of these three are you clearly placing in the S tier?
So, like, if there was a B minus tier, I would place it here, but I'll just place it in the B. And that is Final Fantasy 3.
Right on.
Which is a fascinating game. Like, you can, if you play it from like the perspective of like watch these developers play around with the genre, like Final Fantasy 3 is amazing. Like you have like 7 different airships. It's absurd. You have one fight where like every single job you have needs to be Dragoon. Otherwise, like the other person's gonna die. And like there's one dungeon where everybody needs to be a Dark Knight, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But like it's playing around with the concepts of what an RPG is and what you can do with job systems. And like, to be clear, like Final Fantasy 3 has one of the first job systems in the genre, and they lean into it hard. It's basically like you have to be these jobs at these points throughout the game. But I still really liked it. Like I still really liked having to like kind of play around with those things. Like it still forced you to like think about the situation and gave you the opportunity to play around with those things. Like I know in the original version, they penalized you for changing jobs, but like I played the pixel remaster version and that wasn't the case when I was playing. And so like I really enjoyed playing around with those jobs. I really enjoyed like the music, like the overall music in Final Fantasy 3 is fantastic. Um, the story is like better than people think too. Like it's not amazing, but it's still pretty good for an NES RPG. And so like I think that Final Fantasy 3 is not a perfect game by any means, but I think that given its importance to the genre and the series, I think B tier is appropriate.
This is exactly where I had it. I mean, as a proto version of Final Fantasy V, and as an evolution of the job system from Final Fantasy One, I think FF3 is a really important stepping stone. I think that this is a much less fun version of an FF job system than 5 or 14 or Tactics, which again are three of my favorite job systems ever. Uh, but this is a good step, and I think it has some underrated story moments in it. Like Arya when the world is drowning in water is a surprisingly moving plot point. The three silly old men that are warriors of that think they're the warriors of light, I think is an underrated comedy moment from these games. And one of them sort of saving you near the end is kind of cool actually. The Oh, I'm gonna get their names wrong. Is it Une and Doga? The sort of end game struggle between these old friends, one of whom had descended into darkness, and
I don't remember, but that sounds right.
yeah, I'm probably getting some of the names wrong. I haven't played this game since playing the DS remake, probably 15 years ago, probably more than 15 years ago. I attempted to play this on a translated NES ROM in the early 2000s. I didn't finish it, but then I finally got around to it on the DS version and liked that quite a lot. I think this is a game that maybe I don't think B is too high. Like but I feel like a C is being a little unfair for how much of an important step this was for Final Fantasy job systems and character drama. And I mean I prefer Dragon Quest 3 and 4 a lot more to Final Fantasy 3. And then those are I feel like those two are its JRPG contemporaries. But 3 is not bad. I agree with the B placement. So so far there's been a rather insane run of me just agreeing with Zach and Aleks a lot. Huh. It's peculiar. But do we have any other Final Fantasy 3 appreciators?
Not really. I mean, I also played it just on DS once around the time it came out, and I went into it with like pretty like open arms. Like I was ready to accept it for what it was as something that came out before Final Fantasy 4 and probably wasn't going to have what made that game so fascinating to me. But like just hearing you talk about like these specific like story elements or elements about like how you needed to play with the job system. I like I don't even really remember those. Like the dragoon thing definitely rung a bell, but I think it just mainly goes to show like how little of an impression the game ultimately left on me. And that's also to say like I didn't hate my time with it. I thought it was like decently balanced. I did have a bit of fun appreciating it as like a proto 5 job system, but like you said, Sollosi, like it doesn't stack up to Dragon Quest 3 or 4 by any means. And I don't know that this would be like low C tier or high D tier for me personally. But I can appreciate its historical impact.
Yeah, I mean I think I basically agree with Zach. This if I could give something a B minus, it would be this. But A tier is too high. Kyle, have you played FF3 in any of its versions?
I have actually. I keep hinting kind of at the fact that I played a few of the remasters last year for the first time. I actually did, I did the sort of 1 through 6 and played them in numerical order. So um, I'm I guess predictably a little bit in the middle of everybody right now. I had 3 kind of firmly as a high C tier game, just because I thought originally with the 6 tiers, I thought it was sort of in the middle, and the fact that it did improve on a lot of the things that the first 1 or 2 got right or tried to, and kind of was still its own thing. I can relate to what Aleks is saying in the sense that I don't have a lot of great memories about its particular plot points or even character moments, but I do still kind of on the Sollosi or Zach side of things. I do remember 3 leaving the very specific impression with me that it was like, no, this game's good. Like it was good for its time. It's good in the sense of what it means for the rest of the series. So I think that the fact that it's in B tier is, some people can quibble with it if they want to look at everything that's maybe sitting beside it and kind of compare it in that way. But we didn't build the list that way. We built it kind of one at a time, and each with its own context. So I think that B is totally fine, and I just personally had it a little bit lower. But like we're saying, there's no such thing as a 3.5 stars right now. So here you go, B tier.
Yeah, I mean, I think 3 is not bad at worst, but I also I'm so not passionate about it that if someone had thrown it into C or D, I wouldn't have been that upset. But no, B is fine for me. Do you have anything else on B before Kyle and I decide the fates of the first 2 Final Fantasy games?
Just seeing it a tier above 8 is making me a little depressed, but that's about it.
Looks fine to me. I don't know what's so depressing about that. You should see a doctor.
I hear you, Aleks. I hear you.
All right. Well, if that's it, speaking of Final Fantasy VIII, I placed that in D tier with my first pick of the draft, and I'm the only person that has plumbed the depths of the tier list because that's the only D that's happened all episode. But I'm gonna go double D this time and place another game in D tier, and perhaps predictably, it's Final Fantasy II. Um, I think FF2 does a lot of very interesting things with its gameplay systems. The stat gaining system that Kawazu put into FF2 was used more successfully, I think, in the Saga series that started on the Game Boy and then eventually became its very own specific flavor of RPG. And I'm not saying this as a Saga hater, although I've only finished one Saga game to completion. But FF2 had not figured it out yet. There's not a lot of character nuance either. Like they gave Furion and Maria and everyone else a sort of more character and more dialogue in the remakes of FF2. But even then, I don't think this is a cast that stacks up to just about any other game in the series besides FF1, which has like even very few named characters at all. But the way they implement the stat gaining system in here is breakable if you know what to do. But if you're experiencing it sort of like without a lot of research beforehand, it is just miserable sometimes. And I spent when I first played this game to completion, it was on the GBA Dawn of Souls version. I didn't I own FF Origins, but I didn't get that far in the FF2 on that disc. But I ended up having to grind by like attacking myself over and over and then going back to towns to heal, just because it was like organically playing through the story, you would just hit walls sometimes. I think it's not a very well balanced game, and the stat gain system is sometimes terrible. But in concept, it's not bad, and it was improved upon in later RPGs. In the playable state it's in right now, maybe it's better on the Pixel remaster, but for me, Final Fantasy II is a D.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I've only experienced it as a remaster, so I knew a little bit about the reputation of the game when I went into it last year. Like Aleks was saying earlier, I kind of tried to go into it with an open mind and just treat it specifically as, hey, I'm experiencing, arguably the most famous Japanese RPG series in the worlds ever created, and I'm experiencing it from start to finish, even if it's a remastered version. So I could see the obvious flaws in it. I do think the remaster does a better job of trying to balance things, or perhaps that's the way I tinkered with the sliders. But honestly, like when I went through it, I was like, no, this game is fine. I can understand why it's flawed. I can see why people don't like it. But when I just was able to have that very specific context, then I was personally, sort of satisfied with it. And I think, something has to finish in D some days, and this is the one to do it. That seems fine with me.
Yeah, definitely no complaints here either. I don't know, like very many people who feel so passionately about Final Fantasy II, but I'm sure they're out there clutching their fists right now. But yeah, like you, Sollosi, my first experience with this game, I mean, my only experience with this game was on the Dawn of Souls collection. And funny enough, I was a stupid young kid at the time, and I asked for the Dawn of Souls collection because I'm like, oh, it's got Final Fantasy 1 and 2. And Final Fantasy 2 to me back then was Final Fantasy 4. And so when I booted up this game and it was not Final Fantasy 4, oh my god, was I upset. It did not have any of the fun characterizations. It did not have the kind of pacing and ease of play. I just felt lost. I was confused. I eventually fumbled my way through the game and consulted strategy guides, but overall, it didn't leave any sort of lasting impression on me. Although I do think it's interesting, just also being like the first time we see Star Wars tropes being mobilized in Final Fantasy, because that certainly became a thing going forward. And I guess for the time, it was trying to do some interesting things with like characterization of its protagonists and his companions, but it just doesn't translate well into modern sensibilities at all.
The password stuff isn't bad. There, I said something nice about Final Fantasy 2. Zach, do you have any deep thoughts about FF2, or should we move on?
We should move on. I've played it once on an emulator years ago, and I went south first, and that was a mistake.
I attempted it on an emulator and on an Origins version before playing the Dawn of Souls version, and did not get far either time. But I mean, the Dawn of Souls version is a totally fair way to experience it. I just personally think it's the weakest Final Fantasy game by a significant margin. But we'll see if Kyle agrees with that assessment or not, because there's one game left. It's the very first one, Kyle. You mentioned that you played this game fairly recently because you were running through several Final Fantasy games last year. So you probably have a fresher perspective on FF1 than I certainly do. So where does it land? Is it going to be our 6th S tier?
You know what? As soon as I saw Aleks place 12 and 13, and then Zach take 3, I kind of figured this is how it was going to fall. So for about an hour, I've been thinking about how I'm going to try to phrase and how I feel like placing 1 as the very last game is kind of an unenviable task to leave to the smallest fry on the panel. But I shall take up the flame nonetheless. I do think that there's an argument to be made, I think, for Final Fantasy 1 to be essentially in any tier you wanted. Like if somebody wanted to just say, you know what, it started the whole thing, it's S tier, period, then I'd kind of just shrug my shoulders and be like, okay. And then you could kind of make some nuance to that same argument all the way down. I am going to place it in C tier, I think. And my reasoning is that it's not D tier. Like it I just won't put it side by side with 2. But it's also, if we're kind of taking the 2024 lens, which I get is necessarily fair, like it's a flawed game in a lot of ways. Its pacing is hilarious. Like I remember playing the remaster, and within the first 90 minutes, I had a boat and an airship, and I was like, what the hell is going on? Why is this happening? Why haven't I had to struggle through so many deserts or sewers or any other unnamed dungeon? I just went to the next town and they were like, here's a boat and here's your crew. Oh, that broke? Here's an airship. and it was just, I was just laughing essentially. So there's just so many of those elements, but at the same time, for me, like a C tier is, is still Final Fantasy, but you got to be locked in, and this is the start of it all. This is, yeah, you know what, you are locked into your character choice the entire time. It was also 1987, and the fact that you could even have something like a red mage, granted, I guess I'm only speaking from the remaster, right? But the fact that you could choose these things is a big deal. The iconic image of the four heroes of light is iconic for a reason. It's the beginning of everything that we come to know and love for this series. Its creation is one of the reasons why, like, what, almost 40 years later, we can sit here and talk about the series itself for over 2.5 hours. Like, it's an amazing feat when you look at it historically, but I think if you just try to separate all that and take the game itself, I can't put it higher than C tier.
Yeah, this feels right to me. I mean, I understand your argument that it could belong in any tier. I would have qualms if it was an A or S, but the C feels right. I mean, this is the closest game to something like Ultima or Wizardry, were the games that influenced Final Fantasy 1 the most. It created a bunch of the both gameplay and visual choices and tropes that we associate with Final Fantasy today, whether it's Bahamut or the different designs of black and white and red mages, or what have you. As a game, it really does feel bare bones. Not so much as Dragon Quest One, but not that much more than Dragon Quest One. But like, I mean, I haven't played the Pixel Remaster version of One yet, but I'm kind of interested to, because playing a mega streamlined version of this game seems like a fun afternoon.
It really felt like it. I think I beat it in like 10 hours, and you and I have talked off air about this a lot, and on air too, but the sliders were cranked up. I was like, all right, let's do this. Let's breeze through the first ever Final Fantasy. And it was enjoyable. Like, I knew exactly what I was getting into, in the sense that it was, 1987, and it really was just like a good, like what did Zach say earlier, like a 2-sitting affair, kind of thing. Like, I enjoyed it.
Right on. Yeah, I have no arguments with C tier.
Yeah, C tier is okay with me. It is actually like not a bad game to play, not a great one to play either, but like, yeah, it started the series. It had some interesting ideas. I especially appreciate just how like completely out of whack the characterization of Garland is for the time, because like to have a character with that convoluted of a story behind him in the time that this game came out is respectable, honestly. And it also birthed the greatest Final Fantasy remake ever, Stranger of Paradise. So,
Chaos.
Let's kill chaos.
I agree with all that. I think that it's a game that does well in terms of streamlining combat and streamlining the different job classes in ways that work better than like Dragon Quest was doing at the time, even. But I think that obviously it has obvious shortcomings, and even though it is like the beginning of the series and the beginning of everything that comes after it, even in the most recent Pixel Remaster versions, it still has serious shortcomings. So like, I think C tier is about right.
Cool. I mean, you want to wrap a bow on that one, Kyle, or should we get into organizing the interiors of these tiers?
Let's consider it wrapped. Let's go.
Okay, so I think that ends our placement of the 16 discussed Final Fantasy games into tiers. Now we have to order within the tiers, and I would appreciate if we kept this process relatively brief, so I don't lose my mind editing this episode next week. I mean, we're gonna get this out of the way. There's only one game in D tier. It's Final Fantasy 2. It finishes both first and last in its tier, and that's all I have to say on the matter. Are we ready to move on to C?
Yep, that tracks.
Okay, the 3 games we have in the C tier in number order are 1, 8, and 13. Does anyone have strong feelings about what should go first?
8 has to go first.
8.
Please. Come on.
I'll agree with that if you let me order A tier however I want.
No, but still.
I mean, like, I think that 8 is the worst of those games, but like I don't really care that much. So
I think 8 and 13 are about the same. If Kyle and Alex feel strongly about it, I don't mind going 8, 1, 13. Do we really think is that okay, or do we want to move around further?
I would personally put 13 over 1, but I have no qualms putting 1 over it.
Agreed. If that's part of the bargain, that's fine with me.
I mean, I don't. I sort of both think of 13 and 1 as both C games, but for wildly different reasons.
Yep.
Yeah.
Zach, do you have strong feelings one way or the other?
I literally don't care.
All right.
Put it in the podcast title.
8, 1, 13 it is. Okay, so in number order, the games we have in the B tier are 3, 9, 10, and 12. Do we have strong feelings about what should go first among those?
9.
12 should go
10 for me.
first.
I would
We all
say
have different
Dang it.
opinions.
I would say 9. Do we have any objections to putting 3 last in the tier?
No.
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 I'm okay with that as well.
9, 12, 10.
9, 10, 12
12,
for me.
10, 9, 3.
10 got most second place votes.
I would probably put 9, 12, 10, 3.
It seems like most people want to put 12 over 10, so if that's how it is.
Does anyone want 10 over 12, or is it
I
just
do.
Kyle?
I
Just
do.
Alex, I think.
Oh, just
Yeah,
Alex.
Kyle wanted 12.
Right. All right. So let's put 10 third in B tier.
Boy, that's wild.
It sure is.
It's lucky to be in B tier.
No, it's not.
Oh my god.
So we have 9 and 12 now as first or second in B tier. Who wants 12 ahead of 9?
I
do.
actually probably put 12 over 9.
Yeah, for sure.
And
No. Kyle does not.
Yeah, okay. I also want 9 ahead of 12. I'm okay with 10 third and 3 fourth, but are we at an impasse, gentlemen?
Get Alana in here. She'll break the tie for us.
I guess Alana could break the tie. We can just put 9 first.
I disagree.
I don't care.
12
that much
is
between
the
these two.
superior game. It has way better combat. It has a fairly equitable story, but like the combat is like revolutionary and it changes the entire genre. Whereas 9, its entire purpose was not to change the genre, which is fine.
I like Vivi's arc in Final Fantasy IX more than any dialogue or story related thing in 12.
I like the gameplay in 12 more than I like literally any moment in 9.
Oh man. Oh, we are at a bit of an impasse, aren't we? Man, I was hoping this would go smoothly.
Oh, just wait till we get to S.
Zach, we can put 12 ahead of 9 if 14 is last in the S tier.
No.
No,
I mean,
that's the break.
I mean, 14 doesn't have to go last in S tier because
it's called the door in the face technique. You make a very unreasonable request, so the request after it seems much more reasonable.
All right, Zach, how about this? We put 12 over 9, but we put both 16 and 14 at the bottom of it.
Yes.
No, absolutely not.
I don't like either half of that proposition.
No, like I think that like a lot of people like 9 a lot. I think 9 can go above 12. That's fine.
All right.
My guy.
Thank you for demonstrating grace in this situation.
Great.
Okay.
Now 14 has to be 1.
All right, now we're in the A tier, so we don't have to talk about 14 yet. In number order, the 3 games in A tier are 4, 5, and 15. And
that's the order.
My feeling is that's the order.
I agree.
I would put 15 over 5, but I'm clearly in the minority here.
I mean, I haven't played 15, but I still am a little surprised it made the A tier.
4, 5, 15 feels right to me.
There
All
are
right.
3
I'm
games
okay
in the
with
B
that.
tier. I would.
I'm
flip
just
15
happy
for
A
it,
is
but-
in the I mean, 15 is in the A tier.
All right. So congratulations, 15. You get to stay in A tier, but we're keeping this order 4, 5, 15.
What a charity pick, man. No, just kidding.
Here's the only part of this whole ordering process that I think is going to be difficult. We have 5 games in the S tier. It's our biggest tier. I mean, surprise, surprise, for as much as we've been dunking on multiple games within Final Fantasy, we all love Final Fantasy, and two of us each put 2 games in the S tier, and then in the 5th scenario there was a game that was bumped up by two vetoes in one turn. So in let's say in release order, the 5 games in S tier are 6, 7, Tactics, 14, and 16. Let's go down.
7 needs to go at the bottom.
Let's go down the line. Which game do we want 5th? Starting
7.
Okay, Aleks, what's yours?
5th, 16.
Kyle, what's yours?
14.
Mine's probably also 7. But I would have like 16 4th.
So 16 going 5th seems about right.
7 going 5th seems about right.
And Kyle, you probably want 7 first or second. My guess is that a guess, right?
No, I'm prepared for it to not be. Like, I think Tactics is first or second, and then I think 14 is going to get ham-fisted in there, or whatever word I'm looking for. So I think
not if we don't want it to, Kyle.
Aleks,
right.
Aleks, where would you put 14?
Probably 4th.
Zach, where would you put 14?
First.
I feel like for 14 for me is 3rd. So we have a 1st, a 3rd, a 4th, and a 5th for FF14. Let's put 14 aside for now. Where would each of us put 16? I think for me it's 4th.
For me, it's 5th.
For
Kyle?
me, it's 3rd. Oh, sorry.
4.
That to me that communicates that 16. I mean, it's almost exactly average to be 4th.
I'm okay with that. It's still an S tier.
I mean, it's amazing that it's there.
I think this means that 16 is 4th, and 7 might be 5th. Aleks, where would you put 7?
3rd, but 4th is okay since I haven't played enough of 14 to say.
All right, Zach, you said 5th.
5th.
I have 7 4th. So Kyle, where would you put FF7?
I guess 3rd or 4th. I know that doesn't fit in what I've said so far.
All right. Well, in that case, I think we have to put 16 5th because everyone else feels more strongly about 6 through 14 going in a spot above 4th. So Zach, I'm sorry, I don't think there's enough juice to have 16 better than 5th here.
That's all right. It's S tier. That's a victory.
Correct. Yeah, and so it finished 5th out of 16, which is still excellent. Now here's where it gets more confusing. The 4 of us are all over the place in where we want to put 7. Zach, I think each of us has a different landing spot for 14. All right, where would we each of us put 6? Starting with you, Zach.
For me, it's 3rd.
Okay, for me it is 2nd.
For me, it's 1st.
Kyle?
I personally am trying to value 7 higher than 6th, but I'm also my logical brain is overriding everything, where like I already think it's just going to end up some combination of Tactics and 14, and then 6, 7, 16. Is how I think it's going to end up, and so I'm just kind of like,
don't think about where you think it's going to end up. Where would you put 6 in your personal ranking?
4 then.
Okay, so we're at a 1, 2, 3, and 4 for 6, which is similar to 14, but one spot slightly better than 14 because nobody has 14 5th. Nobody has 6 5th. All right, one last question. Where would each of us put Tactics? For me, it's 1st.
2nd.
That's 2 seconds.
1.
I mean, with apologies to every other game here, that's pretty overwhelming in terms of a balanced placement here.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
I mean, none of us raised a single critique of that game when it was placed in S tier first, and it's weird to place the one spin-off as the best Final Fantasy, but here we are.
We got
All
through
right.
the whole introduction plus the first placement of the first selection in 24 minutes.
So if we're set on tactics first and 16 fifth, the middle is where it muddles. 14 has a spread first, third, fourth, fifth. 6 had a spread first, second, third, fourth, and 7 had fourth. I think similar to 14, fourth, fifth, second, third. No one had 7 first.
I think 7
Yeah, I
is
think that's
obviously
right.
the fourth.
Yep.
Zach, I think your first place vote for 14 puts 7 fourth. And now the question is, what goes ahead, 14 or 6 in spots 2 and 3?
6 has to go above 14.
14 has to. Like 14 does everything better than 6 does.
What are you talking about? The world doesn't end in 14.
You haven't even played all of 14.
All right, fine. It probably does.
All right.
I can play 6 with every person as the main character 6 different times and still have 100 hours left to play Final Fantasy 14 afterwards.
So does Celeste count as a Dami Mommy like a female Rogadin?
Oh, Jesus.
I know what all those words are in English, but I don't know what they mean in that sentence.
Zach, I mean, with apologies, I think you're the only person that wants 14 ahead of 6.
If I am, then fine. Yeah.
I almost feel guilty because if we put 6 ahead of 14, then the list is exactly how I wanted it to go.
So
Hey,
it
man.
seems like we're settled.
It really does. I mean, like, 14 is definitely a better game on the whole than 6, but like, if that's where we're landing, that's where we're landing. I can't do anything about that.
I mean, I have so much more of a personal connection to 6, even though I don't want to
But,
think
like,
of
I
how
also
much of
grew
my
up,
life.
so yeah.
So what you're looking at tactics 6, 14,
7, 16. Yeah.
You know how long it takes 6 to get good? 1 second.
Aleks, you're a hero. A hero of light.
6 didn't need a literal phoenix down to be used on it to come back from the dead and become a
That's
success.
fair. Yeah.
A mega phoenix.
There's just like 190 hours at least of good quality, excellent content in 14 that 6 doesn't have.
But it's a really, really strong 32 hours.
It's I mean, it's good. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, like, I think it belongs in S tier, but above a game that has literally 17 times more good quality content than it does, absolutely not.
And
That's
17
absurd to
times
me.
more.
And 100 times more.
Yeah.
It does. It
Yeah.
just does. It hits so many more highs than 6 that it's insane. But like, we're gonna fall where we're gonna
But
fall.
nobody
What
in
are
the
you saying?
nobody in the universe can get there except for you.
That's absolutely not true. There are at least 10 people on staff who have gotten there.
You're
It's just
swaying
called
me a little
playing
bit.
video games.
But also Zach, I mean, you are the only person that's played beyond Shadowbringers on this
Right.
podcast.
Like, I'm the only person who's completed the game.
Yeah.
So it'd be
Oh, yeah, so
ridiculous
that-
to put it above 6.
Completely informs. Yeah, no, I get that part.
So yeah, it is heavily weighted by what this panel is.
Yep.
I mean, the entire list is forged by what this panel is.
Right.
But I think I'm sorry, Zach. I mean, it's 3-1 putting 6 ahead of 14. I wavered a bit, but I mean, finishing third overall behind 6 in tactics, I think is still super good.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah, honestly.
That's
I mean, we don't need to feel bad for Zach. He's got his favorite 2 in S tier.
Unlike,
True.
a few of us had to rank one of our favorites in C tier.
honestly, I feel great about this list. I mean, my biggest qualm is that I would have 9 in either A or S instead of B. But otherwise, I feel great. my like 3 silly plans that I wanted to happen all happened. Which were ranking 10 in B, 8 in C, and then 6 in tactics, both in S, were my 3 goals, and they all happened. So I feel like I've gotten away with something.
Yeah, you really exploited the veto system well, Sollosi, I gotta say. Because, yeah, 10 and 8 are the two that stick out to me here as something I don't like, but the rest is fine. Actually, 16 is a little sus.
My instinct is to at least explore a system's metagame and exploit it if I feel like it's worth exploiting, which is why I hate the draw cast system in FF8. But I don't mind this system that lets me put FF8 in the C tier. So
Right, so it
I
sounds like you should play FF8 again to me.
Be better than putting Final Fantasy 16 above 14, which is insane. From 3 other people who haven't played it.
Truthfully, I think after this discussion, the game I'm closest to playing next is 15 because that's the one I haven't played.
It's worth playing. It's excellent, honestly.
But and after that, I mean, now I kind of want to try the Zodiac job system version of 12 to see if that would elevate it in my eyes a little bit.
Yeah,
I mean,
both of those are on my list too.
Of course, I want to play 14 because I've said this probably 20 times on podcasts. I'm currently stuck between Shadowbringers and Endwalker.
You haven't even hit the best patch in Shadowbringers yet. Oh.
Right? Yeah, I know. So it's maybe it's because I am too busy podcasting to play an MMO. But 14 finishes a regrettable third on the list. Let's go through the entire list one more time before we wrap the podcast for real. This is the official Retro Encounter Final Fantasy tier list, which has no connection other than one panelist to our ranking of Final Fantasy games from 2017 or 2018, whenever that nonsense happened. So in the S tier at the very top, we have Final Fantasy Tactics, then FF6, then FF14, then FF7, then Final Fantasy 16. Then in the A tier, we have Final Fantasy 4, then 5, then 15. In the B tier, we have Final Fantasy 9, with apologies to Alana and many others. Then Final Fantasy 12, with apologies to Caitlin and many others. Then Final Fantasy 10, with apologies to no one. Then Final Fantasy, then Final Fantasy 3. And then in the C tier, we have Final Fantasy 8, no comment. Then Final Fantasy 1 and Final Fantasy 13. And then lonely last place in the D tier is Final Fantasy 2. That's our list. I'm not gonna say any of us are proud of it because all of us have qualms that are well documented over the last 3 hours. But that's our list, and now it is immutable.
I mean, hey, that was part of the premise. Is none of us end up satisfied, but not a bad list overall. I don't hate it.
It's a pretty good list, except for none of you have finished 14.
So, I mean, I'm afraid that's our list, despite our several caveats and qualms. We had a slightly messy, but I feel ultimately entertaining way of arriving at that list. Thank you, Aleks, so much for suggesting this episode's method and sort of workshopping it over a few months to arrive where we are today. I had fun. I knew I wasn't going to be totally satisfied with the result. Honestly, I'm happier with it than I thought I would be. And I hope that you guys had as much fun as I mostly had.
I would have had more fun if you all finished Final Fantasy 14.
Your feelings are valid, but also imagine what that ask is.
I understand.
I mean, then we could have knowingly put it in third.
Yes.
I mean, look, it would take a lot of juice for it to be elevated ahead of 6 or Tactics in my in my esteem. But I'm going to acknowledge it's possible. But let's talk about a different game that has sort of too many side quests. The next 2 episodes of Retro Encounter are going to be about Dragon Age Inquisition, a 2014 game that is finally getting its true sequel later this year. We've been having a long playthrough of the Dragon Age trilogy, months in the making now. Aleks, you've been on 3 episodes about Dragon Age with me already in the last, how does this math work out? In the prior 10 months. And I know that both you and I are in the middle of Dragon Age Inquisition right now, so it won't be too long before we share our thoughts on it.
Yeah, looking forward to it. I mean, this was a completely fresh playthrough of this trilogy for me, and I've really enjoyed it so far. So looking forward to talking about it.
Right on. And we haven't figured out all of September yet, but we have gotten maybe the biggest part out of the way. We are doing another indie month for Retro Encounter. We're playing 3 relatively shorter indie RPGs or adventure games in September. Each one of them is getting a dedicated single episode. And those 3 games are Case of the Golden Idol, Firewatch, and Day of the Tentacle. Spoiler alert, I have not played any of those games other than maybe 45 minutes of Day of the Tentacle so long ago that I don't even remember what system it was on. So I'm really looking forward to trying all of those as soon as I can pull my head out of Thedas and move on to what we're playing in September. But listeners, if you want to reach out to us to tell us about why our opinions are completely terrible on all of these Final Fantasy games, or Dragon Age, or Firewatch, or Undertale, which was a couple episodes ago, the best way to reach out to us is to email retro@rpgfan.com. RPGFan is on many places on the internet, including our dedicated website where we have features, reviews, and news articles every day. Plus presences on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, Discord, always called either RPG Fan or RPG Fancom. There are many ways to interact with RPG Fan, including visiting the RPG Fan shop. If you go to rpgfan.com/shop, there are 2 storefronts there. One hosted by TeePublic, where you can get RPG Fan apparel and accessories like baby onesies and coffee mugs that maybe not used by the same person at the same time. Also, a second storefront hosted by Hyperplay RPG, a UK-based publisher that is selling a 300-page tome of single-page RPG Fan reviews going back decades. It's a really, really cool book that has several people on this panel represented therein. Please buy RPG Fan merch if you so desire to. Another great way to interact with RPG Fan is to listen to our other podcasts. Every other Monday, we have Random Encounter about current events in RPGs and what games we're playing. And every other Monday, we have Rhythm Encounter, a podcast about RPG music. You can enjoy Random Encounter, Rhythm Encounter, and Retro Encounter on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, or many other ways and means. And we especially would love for you to listen and provide 5 stars out of 5 feedback. But if you want to give us 5-star feedback as people and not as podcasts, let's tell the listeners how they can find us on the internet, starting with you, Kyle.
Yeah, at Twitter, at Kyle RPG Fan.
Now, Alex.
You can email me at alexfraniczek@gmail.com.
Now, Zach.
You can email me, zachw@rpgfan.com, or find me on our Discord as ZachW.
And listeners, you can find me as @Evoker for Dogs on either Blue Sky, Instagram, or RPG Fans Discord. So, we did it. Yeah, we ranked the Final Fantasy games, and none of us are happy, at least until 3 of us get to current level 100 content in Final Fantasy XIV.
Yeah.
Listeners, panelists, and everyone, Hironobu Sakaguchi, thank you, good night, and good luck.